Welcome to the City of Bellevue City Council meeting for Monday, December 6th, 2021. It's the second to the last meeting of the year. Charmaine, can you do a roll call, please?
Absolutely. Mayor Robinson?
Here.
Deputy Mayor Neuenhouse?
Here.
Councilmember Barksdale?
Here.
Councilmember Lee?
Here.
Councilmember Robertson?
I'm here.
And Councilmember Stokes?
Here.
And Councilmember Zahn?
Here.
Great, thank you.
Councilmember Lee, could you please lead us in the flag salute?
Yes, thank you. Please join me in the flag salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
I move to approve the agenda.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. City Clerk, do we have anybody signed up for oral communications tonight?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. This evening there are 3 speakers for oral communications. And with that, I will call the first speaker, who is Bill Thurston. And Mr. Thurston, can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you. Your time begins now.
Okay. Mayor, members of the council, speaking on behalf of the Bellevue Club, I'm Bill Thurston. Today we're at a crossroads that will provide a landmark gateway to Bellevue and the east side. I wish to commend the council for listening to the stakeholders and working with the city to bring together the vision for this special district. In particular, we appreciate the support to protect the special interests of the Bellevue Club and preserve and enhance this for generations ahead. Well distinguished for our landmark athletic resources, we are far more. We are not a fitness club. Since opening, we included significant social resources. In 1990, we added hospitality addition of 67 rooms. The success provided the support for subsequent expansion and added membership capacity. We wish to build upon this diversity and to support new membership. Interest in residency has often been expressed as something members would appreciate. The opportunity to create this with other resources will create a special destination community. Membership would be a requirement as in every other part of our business. Additionally, a mix of other resources would support this area as a special destination. The envelope with an FAR of 2.5 or less provided and supported the needs of this property, and we intend to be within that with more limited development. Unfortunately, the latest code defines the expansion of the club to athletic or hotel resources. We have proposed that the council amend this to include housing in other areas. Block lengths and removal from other requirements of the commercial district are important to preserve. For example, we are not a retail area, and street side retail does not fit the garden property and boulevard we wish to create. In concluding, as a member of the CAC, the vision and detail expressed at that time have served us well. The success of the commercial district supported through RIG properties is consistent with this vision, which also wanted to see a grocery store as a key piece for residents in neighborhoods nearby. We support this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Thurston. The next speaker on the list is Laisha Wigg. And Ms. Wigg, can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. If you could hold 1 second while we reset the timer. Your time begins now.
Thank you. Honorable Mayor, Deputy Mayor, and council members, I would like to discuss our 2 final requests with you on East Main. One is the phasing of the minimum residential requirement, and the second is the importance of accommodating a grocery store. Regarding the first item on the phasing of the minimum residential requirement, the more square feet we build at East Main, the more housing we are required to provide, because the minimum housing requirement is 35% of the total square feet built. To maximize housing, we will need to build multiple high-rise residential towers with affordable units included, which are hard to justify today. The current LUCA requires that all housing has to be completed when 60% of the non-residential is complete. However, if we're not able to justify multiple high-rise towers with affordable units by then all development, including all housing, would come to a stop. Therefore, to reduce the risk of shutting down all development and hence increase the chances of building the maximum housing, we request phasing the minimum housing requirement. This modification should be in the LUCA and not in the development agreement, since this is a timing issue and gives us no additional economic benefit to justify the DA process. Further, requiring us to go through a DA to phase the minimum housing requirement will ironically only further delay housing while we wait for the DA process to be completed. The second item is why we think a grocery store should be included in East Main. One, a grocery store was one of the main amenities that Surrey Downs and the CAC wanted to see in East Main. Two, with the addition of a minimum of 1,500 homes in East Main, there would be great demand for a grocery store in this new neighborhood. Three, the East Main Comprehensive Plan already states under policy SW 59, quote, allow grocery stores. The comprehensive plan, as we understand, is supposed to guide the policies that are written in the LUCA. The CPA also indicates to provide walkable blocks, but says wherever reasonably feasible. Four, a grocery store will help the East Main area feel vibrant and active. If the main purpose of the block length and perimeter requirement is to make the ground floor feel more welcoming, then it seems that a grocery store should be permitted here. And finally, putting a grocery store in East Main will allow this area to become a 15-minute neighborhood where all the daily needs of people are within a 15-minute walk of where they live. I'm going to pass it on to Mon, who will discuss why the block length and perimeter exemption for a grocery store should be in the LUCA instead of in the DA, and how the block length requirement affects mom and pop stores. Thank you so much for all of your time and deliberations to date. We cannot say thank you enough.
Thank you, Ms. Wig. As alluded to, the next speaker and final speaker on the list is Mon Wig. Mr. Wig, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
I can, thank you. Your time begins now.
Thank you. This is Mon Wig at 4811 134th Place, Southeast Bellevue. I would like to cover the two items that Lisha just mentioned. Number one is why the block length and perimeter exemption for a grocery store should be in LUCA instead of in a development agreement. Development agreement inherently creates delay and uncertainty. Tenants will not commit to lease until they know the site is zoned and it will work for them for parking, access, etc. Grocers want parking to be next to their stores. Pushing the block length exemption for grocery store to a future DA will force a grocery store to either delay their decision until a DA is approved, or grocery store can walk away from East Main because they do not want to wait for the DA process to be completed. In either case, the entire project is delayed, including the delivery of all housing and affordable housing, by at least a couple of years. Second reason for block length exemption to be in LUCA is as follows. Grocery store deals are difficult to justify to begin with, since they pay less rent and cost more than other retailers. Further, we do not gain any density or height by putting in a grocery store. Pushing the exemption to DA would indicate city expects public benefit. These items make it impractical to pursue a grocery store in East Main because of low margins, expectation to pay for public benefit, and no gain in height or density. So not only tenant may walk, but it may become harder for us to justify a grocery store. In summary, there's no benefit to the city to put block length exemption in DA. In fact, putting this in DA will delay the project and the housing. Second item is how block length requirement affects mom and pop stores. A grocery store anchors a development and brings traffic to the property. This allows mom and pop stores to survive. Without anchors, such as grocery store, mom and pops generally do not survive. If mom and pops do not survive, then ground floor will be empty and dead. So we should make it as easy as possible for a grocery store to come. We want you to know we really and truly appreciate all the help that the council and the staff and the effort they have all put in for all these years. We appreciate it very much, and we are looking forward to tonight's deliberations. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you, Mr. Wigg. That is the end of our pre-registered oral communications list. At this point, I would ask if there is anyone else participating in this meeting who would like to make communication to the council. If so, please use the raise hand function or *9 if you're connected with a phone. And Mayor, I do not see any additional hands. That would close oral communications.
Okay, thank you. Next, we're on to the report of the city manager. And Mr. Miyake, I believe you have 2 items you wanted to talk about.
Yes, Mayor and council members. The first one is the reappointment of the 7 members of the Bellevue Convention Center Authority Board for the terms listed in the management brief, which are within your packets. And just by way of background, the Bellevue Convention Center Authority's charter requires me to seek your concurrence on any appointments to the board. As I mentioned, I'm planning to reappoint the existing 7 members. The existing board has done a tremendous job at partnering with the city and ensuring the continued viability of the convention center throughout the impacts of COVID. The reappointments are also supported by the BCCA Executive Director. Again, I am seeking your concurrence, and I turn it back to you, Mayor.
Thank you. So are there any objections to the proposed reappointment of the 2 members that are in the packet? I'm not seeing any. Council members on as the liaison, would you like to say something?
Sure, thank you, Mayor. I would say that these 2 years have been super challenging, and the board and the members have worked really well to guide the Convention Center Authority. So I support their reappointment. I think that as we move forward, we'll continue to have challenges because of the challenges with COVID, and we are not back at capacity by any means in terms of conventions and different activities. So we'll continue to appreciate their guidance and their expertise as we move forward. Thank you.
Great. So Mr. Miyake, I believe that's a consensus for your recommendation.
Thank you, Mayor and council members. I'm going to just go to the next item, Mayor, if you don't mind. And it is a good news story. It is on the Bellevue Essentials. This evening, council, we're going to hear an informational update on the 2021 Essentials program. Last week, the program saw its 9th year graduating class, which consisted of 31 residents. Joining this evening is Mark Heilman, our neighborhood outreach manager, and 2 graduates from the class, Ken Rosenau, as well as Michelle Rainville. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Mark. Mark?
Great. Thank you so much, Mr. Miyake. Charmaine, can I ask, has Michelle joined us? It appears that Michelle may be having some technical difficulties, but we are so glad to be with you this evening. Thank you, Mayor Robinson and council, for joining us. One of you was with us each evening of our 12 weeks of Bellevue Essentials. This was a year that we didn't anticipate, all of us in many ways. And so this was our 2nd year of being virtual, with neighborhood being out in the neighborhoods and hosting Bellevue Essentials. This year we did everything that we could safely do to connect class members together. The first evening we had folks come to the Bellevue Botanical Gardens to pick up dinner so that we could have dinner together. We had a picnic together when it was safe to do so. And then once again, utilities and Bellevue Service Center hosted us and doing a drive-through, which residents just thoroughly enjoyed. So then next slide, please, Charmaine. On the final evening, we really throughout the 12 weeks want to give as much voice and time for residents to ask the questions and make comments. And particularly at graduation, we ask each of them to share 3 words of what the time together has meant. And you can see together a word cloud with the largest words representing what was mentioned most often. It was just a really hopeful evening, and it was great to hear both from our class member and from Randy Yang. And so to be able to celebrate together something that we had accomplished that we didn't anticipate doing this remotely once again, to have the words engaging, inspiring, and home be the words that would come together for residents as they look back on the 12 weeks was just very much what we would express as staff as well. This is very much a one city effort with about 70 staff that present throughout the 12 weeks. And then last slide, please, Charmaine. On the last night, as we conclude, we talk about neighborhoods, and we asked the class a question, and I think this is the 6th or 7th year that we have done a doodle biz illustration, and we very much want to give voice and to be able to have the class express what their city means to them. And so this year, the question was, how have you seen our community shine through COVID? And the emphasis here is on hashtag Bellevue Strong. And so you can see, and we'll have opportunities for you to see this closer in future days, council, but very much things that our residents are proud of, ways that they can contribute, and ways that they look forward to the future with tremendous amount of hope. So at this point, I would like to turn, Michelle, if you are with us, would love to have Michelle Rainville speak. If not with us.
Unfortunately, Mark, she does not appear to be connected.
Okay, so sorry about that. Well, I will share one comment from another resident though, that as we got comments from residents, they were very much along this line. Shauna Oxsmith said, what was impactful for me is I feel more a part of the city of Bellevue. I feel more informed, more empowered, knowing what my city has to offer, and that makes me want to give more and to participate more actively as a resident of Bellevue. So even though we need to do this year remotely once again, the residents just entered in. It is just a tremendously diverse class of 31. And one of the things we're very proud of as well is Julie has put together a packet for other cities to know how to host something comparable to Bellevue Essentials. And this year, we tried to maximize as many benefits as we possibly could. And one of those is that we had 8 different cities from 3 different states that joined us to learn about Bellevue Essentials and replicating that in their cities as well. So we're very proud of what Julie Ellenhorn and the rest of our entire staff have been able to accomplish. So then I'm going to turn to Ken Rosnow, who is one of our residents that was one of the 31 that was with us. We had almost 100% participation as we were able to do this virtually. So Ken, we'll turn to you and thank you so much for sharing with us tonight. Ken Rosnow.
Good evening. My name is Ken Rosnow, and I live at 401 109th Avenue Southeast in Surrey Downs. I would like to thank the City Council members for your support of the Bellevue Essentials program and also acknowledge the hard work and dedication that Julie Ellenhorn, Mark Heilman, and the many others in the city that have put this program together. In my 25 years of living in Bellevue, I've been involved in a variety of volunteer opportunities, from coaching Little League to being a member of the Bellevue CERT Leadership Board and also the president of the Surrey Downs Community Club. After hearing great reviews about Bellevue Essentials over the last couple of years, I decided to apply to the Bellevue Essentials 2021 class and to gain more knowledge of the inner workings of Bellevue, and was honored to be given one of those slots. During the 10-week class, I was pretty amazed by the number of services that the city provides its residents, learning about utilities department, community development, parks and community services, and transportation, just to name a few. In addition to the information presented by the truly passionate staff in these departments, I was able to engage, unfortunately, mainly in a remote capacity with the other students in the program during in-class activities and also pre-class chats, with each of these interactions, I was able to see how much these fellow classmates had a true calling for volunteering, and it was really both motivating and inspiring. Now that the class has ended, I look forward to continuing my volunteer work with the city and other nonprofit organizations. I will also be reaching out to the other Bellevue Essential graduates, Bs as I now know that they're called, for future volunteer opportunities, and also to leverage their collective wisdom from their volunteer experiences. And as a current president of our Surrey Downs Neighborhood Community Club, I'm planning on sharing this information that I've learned in this program with the other neighbors in the hopes that we'll keep our neighborhood strong and also spur volunteerism, not only in the neighborhood, but across the city as well. As the city continues to grow, additional pressures will be placed on neighborhoods, and having its residents aware of these pressures will hopefully allow neighbors to become more engaged and see the future direction of the city. And not only the way, sorry, kind of mixing my words up here. What I want to say was, as the city continues to grow, there will be additional pressures placed on neighborhoods, and having the residents aware of these pressures and become engaged in the future direction of the city can only lead Bellevue to stay strong and remain a vibrant community. It's my hope that Bellevue Essentials will continue its run in the years ahead, and also additional residents will want to remain engaged in volunteering with the city, as this city has given a lot to me, and hopefully this class with its great resources of information, inspiration, and motivation will guide others. And I, again, want to thank the council and staff for making Bellevue such a great city. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. One last thing I would mention was that in August, we finally were able to gather the 2020 class together at Crossroads Community Park. And we asked them, what have you done differently since you graduated from Bellevue Essentials? I think we had almost 100% participation again of 30 residents. And as we went around the circle, it was just very moving to hear what each of them have done over the past year. And even though it's been difficult, and I know we all need to hear this and we hope it's true, Bellevue Essentials worked even though it was remote. And that's because of the great resilience of our community and residents, and just that they were willing to enter in and really communicate and connect with one another, and also what our staff and council did as well during the past 12 weeks. So thank you for the support, but thank you so much for the opportunity to be able to connect with our residents and share with them the great strengths and the great work of our city. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. And Ken, it's really gratifying to see so many of our residents as passionate about the city moving in the right direction as we all are. And I see a lot of our council values reflected in our artwork with all the inspiring words. So that's terrific. Thank you very much. Mr. Miyake, did you have anything else to share?
Nothing more, Mayor, for this evening under the manager's report.
All right, thank you. So next we have the consent calendar. Is there a motion to approve?
I move to approve the consent calendar.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, great. So we are moving into our study session items. We have 2 items. Mr. Miyake, would you like to introduce them?
Sure. Thank you, Mayor and council members. The first item on your study session agenda this evening is the Bellevue Police Community Crisis Assistance Team Trial Update, also known as CCAT. By way of background, the Bellevue Police Department and Fire Department CARES program conducted a pilot program in an effort to better respond to calls for service involving persons in crisis who are suffering from behavioral health effects. The pilot program was completed, and an analysis report of the pilot program is near completion. This topic was last in front of council back on March 15th of this year. And joining us this evening to present and answer any questions you might have are Chief Wendell Shirley, Police Chief Wendell Shirley, Andrew Popchak, Major with the Police Department, and Captain Alicia McKinney, also with the Police Department, as well as Jay Hagan, Fire Chief, and Natasha Grossman, the Bellevue Cares Fire Cares Program Manager. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Chief Wendell.
Thank you, Brad. Good evening, Mayor Robinson, Deputy Mayor Newenhouse, and City Council members. It's a pleasure to be before you this evening. The goal of our presentation is to update you on the results of the Community Crisis Assistance Team Pilot Program, better known as CCAT, that was implemented by your Bellevue Police Department and the Bellevue Fire Department's CARES program. As we all know, cities across the country continue to explore different models and strategies for how to better respond to people in crisis, particularly those suffering from behavioral health crises. Far too often, the traditional response has been ill-equipped police officers handling these situations with no assistance from any other service provider, and in most cases have handled them successfully. However, unfortunately, far too many of these encounters have ended tragically. In response, and in our commitment to providing the best possible service to those that live, work, and visit the city of Bellevue, the decision was made to test a pilot program, Ccat, to evaluate a different approach to how the Bellevue Police Department would respond to people in crisis. The fire department's CARES program was already in place and doing some great work. This made for a potentially perfect partnership with specially trained police officers and the CARES mental health professionals. We certainly know that there are other models out there that other cities are exploring. However, we felt that the pieces were in place here in Bellevue with the CARES program for us to test this pilot. Presenting with us tonight are members from the police department and the fire's CARES program. I will now turn the presentation over to Police Major Andrew Papachov. Andrew.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to come talk about CARES this evening. Tonight, we're going to share an overview of the pilot program that we conducted over a 4-month period. In tonight's presentation, we're going to work through the background, what the program development was like, and then an overview of the program itself. I want to say that as we work through the presentation tonight, all of the quotes that you'll see, as well as the quotes in the later program evaluation, are the words of the people that CCAT served, the members of the CCAT team itself, community organizations that the CCAT worked with, and others CCAT had contact with throughout the work. We wanted to make sure that their quotes and voices were heard during this presentation. So the background of how we came to developing CCAT was that we are seeing an increase in calls involving subjects in crisis and those in behavioral health crisis specifically. As you can see by the statistics, we've seen an increase in the amount of calls. And specifically with the statistics, these are just calls that were titled suicide and mental emotional. There were other calls that had to do with people in crisis that were not titled this way. With this increase, we knew we had to do something differently. Not just internally, but the community expected something differently. As the chief spoke about, we don't think the best option is to have officers arrive and try to handle it with only a legal response. We had to look at it from a different perspective and with the community expectation, respond differently to those in crisis. That includes the de-escalation, it includes providing additional resource. It is spending the time and energy to sit with that person and have the discussion and about what their needs were and see if we can fulfill those needs. At the same time, we wanted to make sure we had safety considerations in mind. We had the safety of the person in crisis, the safety of the public in general, and the safety of the city employees, both the MHP and the officer on scene. And those are balances that when we built this program, we wanted to make sure that we balanced all of those, but the focus is always on what's best for the resident of the city that we're serving. The other piece is that we wanted to make sure we built partnerships in. And that was part of our development process, was to meet and sit down and have discussions with our community partners and ask them what they wanted in a program that we were working on and developing. What were their needs? How could we better serve those organizations or better serve the person in the community with a crisis and how they get the resources from those organizations? How we decided to do that was that we developed the Community Crisis Assistance Team. And what that is a coordinated response between the police and fire department working together for the best outcome for the person in crisis. It was about the time, the training, and the perspectives that came together to make this team successful. We had to first spend the time with the person. And usually police officers are called to call. What we did is we took the time perspective out. We said you could spend as much time as you want on the call. There wasn't another call waiting for you. You spend the time needed to make sure this person got the help that they needed, as well as continue to build that relationship. That person needs to reach out to you tomorrow or next week, you're there to continue that connection. People in crisis can sometimes respond differently to if dealing with the same person over and over, because you build that relationship. It was training. It was spending the time to train our officers in many different forms of dealing with people in trauma. It's spending the time and understanding what someone in crisis, how they're at, and looking and seeing those critical issues before they came up, and de-escalating that person and bringing them back down. Also, it's about the perspective. If I'm a police officer, I can sometimes see the world the same way over and over, and another police officer next to me sees it the same way as well. But when you team the police officer up with an MHP who sees the world differently than the officer, you get 360 degrees rather than just 180. And that was key to this program, where having two people in the vehicle working with each other, they saw the world differently. And if I had the solution as a police officer, I had somebody next to me that I could bounce it off of that saw the world differently. If they had the answer, they could bounce it off of me. That perspective of seeing the world differently and understanding the differences of the two different perspectives, the fire perspective and the police perspective, was about having the best outcome for that person. We looked around and we realized the best partnership is the one we already had. Our police department and fire department have a phenomenal relationship, all the way down to our AED program, where we co-dispatch and heart attack between the police department and fire department together, because the police department knows they can get there and start the process, and the fire department gets there to save the person's life. It's working together with mental health like we already work together with medical calls. So how do we do this? We sat down and we decided to evaluate 3 different models. One model is the police officer and the MHP working together, like I discussed before, the perspectives of the two people sitting in that car together, having those discussions at scene. Who relates better with the person in crisis? How can we work together to serve that person in a way that is best for them? The other option we tried was a 2-officer model, where we had 2 officers with specific training, specific uniforming, and the working together to bounce ideas off of each other. These officers, as you can see from the photograph here, we trust them differently. They're not wearing a traditional blue uniform because we understand this uniform can carry some history with it, that there can be a reaction from someone in crisis of a uniform that's different. So we had them wear a plainclothes uniform that was different. They're still uniformed, they're still identified as a police officer in an emergency situation, but that's that safety piece. The safety of the person, because they don't have that reaction to a police officer. At the same point in time, our officers are identifiable. We train these officers in mental health first aid, crisis intervention, trauma. All of that training went in so that they went into these situations aware of the person they're dealing with in crisis. And part of that is we diverted the calls at 911. When the call came in, we diverted that 911 call specifically to officers trained, or officers at MHPs trained to deal with individuals in crisis. And that was a key piece of this, of how we team that up. I'm going to hand it over to Natasha Grossman to discuss CARES 101.
So CARES 101 is the 3rd model, which was basically what we already have in place. CARES 101, as you all know, CARES has been in existence since 2012, and it was always a partnership between fire and police to address folks in our city who were calling 911, but really needed a different kind of response. They needed some connection to resources or some other kinds of support or case management. And then in 2017, we stood up a response unit, CARES 101, that's in service 7 days a week, and it's staffed by 2 professional social workers who can come on scene on a 911 call. One, either fire or police is on scene and feels like it'd be helpful to have a social worker there, somebody who can either help with de-escalation or provide resources or sit with somebody so that the fire crew or the police officer can get back into service and be with other people or go to the hospital or support family members. So that was the 3rd model, and it was those social workers from the CARES 101 unit that also staffed the CCAT unit and rode with the officers.
So when we entered this program, we set the goals from the very beginning. The goal was to improve community police response to mental illness by diverting individuals from the criminal justice system. That seems like it's a very large goal, but we thought that was achievable. And part of the way we thought that was achievable was to make sure, like I said, the dispatching process where these officers went first. And we had the MHP on scene immediately. So when that person was in crisis, we had all available resources at the time of the call. The units were not dispatched to priority 1 incidences, the highest priority incidents. They were triaged from the lower priority incidences to make sure that the person got the resources they need. The other thing we want to do is address underlying issues to improve the quality of life of others and reduce recidivism. The point of reducing improving the quality of life is the person that's in crisis maybe is having trouble caring for themselves. It's not about the person in the street. It could be someone inside of their home. This was very specifically designed to be a program that served anybody in crisis, no matter if they were housed, unhoused, where they were in the city. When they were dispatched, they sent to discuss it, to talk to that person and improve their quality of life. What resources could we provide to them to make it better? The outcomes we looked at from the very beginning was, is it best serve the person? It's not about how does it serve the officer, how does it serve the city? Have we served the resident of Bellevue best? And it's not providing immediate care. That was a key piece that we built into this. Is it wasn't just about the initial care of triaging at the scene. It was the follow-up care that CARES provided the person and the ability to contact the officer, contact CARES, because we understand this is not a one-touch issue. We can't just go out there and touch this person once and help them deal with the issues that they're having. This was a repeated contact where we went over and over and over again and talked to that person, built those relationships. We wanted to increase patrol time to focus on crime. We want our officers that are trained in criminal apprehension to go out there and deal with traffic stops, or traffic motor officers do motors. These officers specifically designed, this program was specifically designed to deal with that and release our patrol officers to do other tasks. We wanted to reduce the use of force incidences, the arrests, and jail bogies. We wanted to divert people from the very beginning to the resources they need rather than jail. And then we wanted the community collaboration. We know we can't do this alone, just like the AED example I gave. It's the police department working with organizations in the community to get the resources that person needs, rather than saying that we are the one-stop shop. It doesn't work that way. We have to work with other resources in the community. I'm going to hand this off to Captain Alicia McKinney. Oh, my apologies. I believe it's, I'm handing back to Natasha Grossman.
Okay, back to me. So we ran the pilot for 4 months. It started in May, on May 1st, and ended on August 31st. And during that time, we were very lucky to have an academic program evaluation by Carol Harper. Carol Harper has been the program evaluator for the CARES program since 2015. She does an annual program evaluation for us and has developed a whole evaluation system, database system, a lot of support for our program. And she very generously, pro bono, offered to volunteer and do a program evaluation for this program. She has been doing this for 30 years. She's been a researcher for 30 years. She's a formal faculty member of the University of Washington and a research manager there. And she has a lot of experience, and she knew CARES, so she really understood the kind of work that we're doing. So the kind of data that we've pulled from her report, which we'll be talking about a little bit later. So what you can see here is that we had 1,785 client contacts, and what that meant was contacts with or on behalf of the client we were served. So that could have been somebody who was seen by the police officers or the MHPs, or even our MSW students who would do the follow-up and case management. It could be talking to someone on behalf of them, talking to a provider, making a referral to a service provider, making connections, talking with family members. But there were 1,785 client contacts during that time. And we had 239 clients engaged. And engaged meant that they said, yes, we're going to, those are the 239 people that the CCAT officers actually made contact with. Of those, the CCAT officers would then ask, or the MHP would ask, would you like CARES to follow up with you? Would you like ongoing support? And if people said, yes, then CARES would provide that kind of case management that we've already been doing, again, since 2012 with police and fire. And 108 of the folks who were asked said, yes, we would like that kind of follow-up. So 108 additional people referred to CARES. And of those, 100 were brand new clients, people with whom we'd never had contact or had never been referred to us before in just those 4 months. So there was a significant amount of need that was found by this group of people. Next slide, please. And what we also found was that the people with whom this team engaged were generally had more than one issue. So we were tracking what were the issues that had us seeing them or that they talked about when we were meeting with them. And as you can see, the top 3 issues were some sort of mental or behavioral health issue or crisis, that they were currently unhoused, or that they were substance using. And I think what's most significant is 65% of the people that we contacted actually had some co-occurring issues. So these were significant. These were people who had very complex issues and who needed more than a one-time contact. They needed ongoing support and follow-up and really needed to be connected to services. And that was what the CCAT and CARES program in partnership were able to provide for them. Next slide, please.
Due to the significant increase of these clients, it was important for CCAT to understand who they were serving. Natasha just spoke about what kind of issues our clients presented, from mental health to substance use and to homelessness. This chart is going to demonstrate the actual client demographics. These demographics highlight the emotionally difficult and complex struggle that those clients faced and the nature of the challenges that CCAT faced during their engagements. Next slide. The CCAT logic model consisted of both the subjective and objective data collection. This slide is going to discuss the objective data that specifically addresses the outcomes CCAT set out to achieve. So during the pilot, it was important to understand how the calls of service were being generated. We wanted to know, were these 911 calls that were coming from the dispatch center, or was this CCAT doing proactive outreach? What the pilot determined was that the majority of these calls came from a response to a 911 generated call. This is significant because what this tells us is that actual citizens or visitors are calling 911, generating these calls, and that they're coming in through PD. Not only were the types of calls important, but during the pilot, it was important to understand the complex nature of the individual suffering from behavioral crisis. Most of the time spent on calls can take a significant amount of the officer's time. As you saw earlier in the PowerPoint, it could take up to 2 hours for an officer to clear a call. And many of the times these resulted in undesirable outcomes like going to jail or going to hospital. CCAT wanted to resolve this issue and understood that time is of the essence and that was important to build relationships, find solutions, and also address underlying issues. The program evaluation also affirmed that we accomplished this outcome. In fact, a family member of a CCAT client reported, CCAT was willing to build a relationship with her sister and got her help because of the relationship building. It was wonderful to have someone specific to call who knows the situation when I was concerned and worried, and not have to call 911 again and again and explain the whole story again. CCAT knows my sister only because CCAT had a relationship with my sister. She got the needed help and I got help too. What we know is that the impacts of behavioral crisis not only impacts that individual, but it impacts the families and it impacts the community as well. And it's important that our officers are able to take the time to address these issues in order to find solutions and to help them out. We also saw an increased diversion rate from the hospital or jails. We know that one of the major frustrations amongst the community is that many of the individuals suffering from behavioral crisis end up in the criminal justice center or the hospital emergency room, just because there's no other place to take them. When creating CCAT, we recognize this response may not be the most effective for the client. As such, one of the outcomes of CCAT was to increase the diversion rates away from the jails and the hospitals. Again, the result of the pilot confirmed that we did in fact increase diversion rates out of the jails and the hospitals, and we provided a more appropriate solution to the CCAT and CCAT clients and their families. As you know, use of force against individuals in behavioral crisis has been an issue not only throughout the country, but also in our community. Reduction in the use of force was an important goal of CCAT. Again, the results of CCAT showed a decreased use of force during the program. In fact, amongst the CCAT officers in 4 months, there were only 5 uses of force total. And what we saw was that 4 of those uses of force occurred in the first 2 months. 1 occurred in the 3rd month and 0 occurred in the 4th month. This showed a decreasing trend of the use of force. We attribute this to the officers being non-uniformed, having a higher level of training, being able to take time on the calls, and being able to find creative solutions for our clients. In fact, one of CCAT's clients, he was having a mental health issue one day. He came back and he said, it was really bad. My breakdown was so bad. I was out of it, lying on the floor crying. When I started to come out of it, I was surrounded by 4 to 5 cops in uniforms with big guns. But one guy was in a different uniform, started to talk in a calm, gentle voice. He asked about my tattoos, the music group I liked because there were posters on the walls. He connected with me. The CCAT officer related to me. I think he saved my life. I'm a big guy. I think if it wasn't for him, it would have all gone south really fast and he might have got up fighting. Next slide. So what did we learn from the pilot program? And we realized that CCAT did create outcomes that were desired. We realized that it fulfilled a community need. Last year, we heard the outrage in the OIR listening sessions. There was the public pledge to our citizens to review our uses of force. We had new laws and there was community concern. We knew we had to do something different. And the Bellevue Police Department and the Bellevue Fire Department heard this need. We created this program as an alternative response. We understood that we needed safety for not only our clients, but also our mental health professionals, as well as our officers and our stakeholders. That's where our community partners came in. We found that we built positive relationships with our community partners, Congregations for the Homeless, NAMI, Sophia's Way, Overlake Hospital. We wanted, again, safety for that staff, and we wanted better processes because we know that if these individuals didn't have wraparound services, most of them would fall back into the same cycle and possibly back into the criminal justice system. We wanted positive outcomes for citizens and families experiencing behavioral health issues. We want these individuals to know that when they call 911, that there's an alternative for response. Because as we know, 911 can be the last line of defense. We want to make that interaction as safe as possible through non-triggering symbols, compassion, training, and service. One testimonial from one of our unhoused clients, he says, when I first came to Bellevue, and they stopped me, they saw that I was new and they wanted to say hello. And I wasn't in any trouble. So on my first day in Bellevue, the CCAT officer got me lunch and water. When you're covered in dirt and dirty, they don't make you feel like a grimy scumbag. You know what I mean? They make you feel like a human being and treat you with respect and kindness. And that has never happened with the police. So the CCAT team is building trust and relationships with individuals that previously hadn't been trustworthy of police. They're making a difference out there. We also understood that one of the outcomes is that we were providing solutions. We were providing solutions for clients, families, stakeholders. We could information share. Where the police could lack information at times through how many times an individual has been involved, how many times the person has been seen by a medical professional for what diagnosis. We can't diagnose them, but we can work and find out those things in order to make better solutions for the individual and make better decisions. We also were able to create a one city approach through fire and police. This is really important because, again, there's a lot of stakeholders in this program. And it was important that we use our resources that we already had, partner together, and create a solution for our community. And finally, and I think most importantly, we enhance the quality of life. Again, this was about our clients, and this is about our clients' families. We want to find creative solutions and approaches so they're comfortable calling 911 and get the treatment and services that they need.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I just want to mention again how proud we are of this work on this pilot. I wanted to let you know that we are in receipt of a draft final report done by our program evaluator, Carol Harper. You heard a little bit about her earlier. We really thought it was important to ask some of the questions about what we were studying and have Carol help us with that for a couple of reasons. One is that she has the kind of academic credentials that we will be able to sort of stand behind the results we do get. And we hope to be able to continue or contribute maybe best practices to the field of study going forward, regardless of what we choose to do. The report has both qualitative and quantitative information. So we'll be sharing with you some hard data. And also, I think Carol did some 30+ interviews with clients that we serve, dispatchers, other service providers. And so you should get a couple different kind of views on that information. And then we're going to be seeking your guidance and your thoughts, and then we'll start working on an outreach strategy. And we would plan to use the Engaging Bellevue website to do that, as well as leveraging the existing police advisory councils. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share with you what we did on this pilot. What we learned. We appreciate the audience with you this evening, and we stand ready for your guidance and your observations. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. Are there any comments or questions from the council? Start with Councilmember Barksdale, followed by Councilmember Zahn, and then Deputy Mayor, and then I'll continue on. Go ahead, Councilmember Barksdale.
All right, thank you, Mayor. And also thank you to Chief Shirley, Chief Hagan, Major Papachak, Captain McKinney, and Natasha. First of all, for the thoughtfulness and the approach that you all have taken to put together CCAT and execute on that. I also just want to note that I had a chance to see CCAT in action a couple of times. I popped up based on a couple of emails that we received, and really appreciated the trust that the CCAT team had developed with the members of the community who were unhoused, and just to the point that was made earlier, the time that was taken. So really appreciate that. I appreciate the experimental approach, given that there are a number of programs out there. And I guess one of my questions is, in addition to, not in exclusion of, the current approaches that we took, was there any discussion around testing a program where the mental health provider went out and in scenarios where it made sense? So I get that it's not feasible in all cases, but are there scenarios that we considered where the mental health professional went out? And then secondly, for the data, as we come up on the retreat sometime in the new year, first quarter maybe, would it be possible to get those data prior to the retreat so that we could think about sort of resources that might be necessary to proceed? And then my last question is, I saw the next steps in terms of the community engagement, but what are we committing at least to saying that we're going to have some program, some continuation of a program based on the findings, and it's just a matter of seeing what it is going to look like and how it's going to be designed? Or are we even waiting to see if we're going to have some program to continue this work?
Thank you, Councilmember Barksdale. First off, maybe I'll let Natasha maybe speak to the first part as it relates to looking at other programs, right? If we're doing that or not, only having, say, hypothetically CARES, mental health workers respond only.
So that is something that many people have asked us about. One thing that was, I have to say, surprising, even to the MHPs, that I'd like you to know, is that there were times when the MHPs went out with the police officers, and the client that they were talking to had absolutely no interest in talking to the MHP, wanted nothing to do with them. They wanted to talk to the police officer. So I think that we don't know who people want to talk to when we get there. But most importantly, the dispatchers have less than a minute to be able to identify what's happening on the other end of the phone. And oftentimes when we get there, it's not at all what anyone thought it was going to be. And for us, we're just really concerned about the safety of our social workers. And we're just not sure that we can get enough information to know what it is that we're walking into. And we just want to keep people safe. We really want the social workers to be safe. So for that reason, we've chosen to say that we're not going to go out without police on calls that were generated as police calls at this time. And I don't know if Chief Hagan wants to say anything more about that.
Thank you, Natasha. And Councilman Barksdale, regarding your second question about the data report, will it be available before the retreat? We certainly want to make sure that's the case. It goes through its review process, so and to the city manager's office, so that we can get it to you guys as soon as possible. And your last question, as it relates to what's happening in the interim, well, once the CCAT pilot ended, those officers went back, integrated back into patrol, but they did not stop applying the lessons learned and the training that they got on calls for service. And the second part of that is, the goal is to also train all of our patrol officers, right, in this type of approach, because CCAT won't be the only officers responding to these type of calls. So we're certainly working to integrate that into our entire patrol force so that everyone has those skills and understanding. And it's my understanding anecdotally that since the pilot ended, our regular patrol officers have been making more referrals to CARES probably than they ever have. So that's certainly the plan moving forward.
All right, thank you all. I would love for us to have some program continue, especially given the results of the program, the pilot. So however we can make that happen would be awesome. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Councilmember Zahn.
Yeah, I just want to actually reiterate my fellow council member Barksdale's comment about how we keep this going as much as we can, because it is so successful. And just thank you, because I do believe that, we are very thoughtful in looking at how we provide and develop a program that works for our community. And a couple of things I want to highlight, because I really think it's so meaningful, what you said about making the interactions as safe as possible. And really what I heard is that this is about meeting people where they are and providing them with what they need, and community expectations, safety, and partnerships. What I wanted to understand is, as I was looking at the partners, I see CFH, NAMI, Sophia Way, Overlake. And yet, as I think about diversion from hospitals and jails, I'm curious about where are they diverting to? Because as I look at these different service providers, I don't know that they have the bandwidth either for the kind of behavioral and mental health services that the clients need. And so is there some lobbying and advocacy we need to be doing to create more of these landing locations for the clients? And it's just in time so that as they have needs, that we're actually able to truly provide that diversion. So that's one of my questions. And then my second one is, you briefly touched on NORCOM, but I would like to understand a bit more about how we really partner there, so that as they take the calls, what are the right questions to ask to be able to better triage what the clients might need, which then leads me to my other question, which is, I know that at the state level, we've adopted the 988 system, and it's in the middle of creating that system and resources. So can you help me understand how what we're doing may align with where 988 is going? And I want to make sure that we're positioned well to be able to get access to that funding that I understand is going to be available. I was exciting to see that later on in our agenda, there is a note about at the federal level for our legislative update that hopefully we'll be able to get some federal funding for CCAT. But I want to make sure we don't leave any money on the table at the state level either. if the 988 is going to come with funds. So those were some of my comments and questions. Thank you so much. I think this is well needed in our community, and just want to figure out how we can support this as much as we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Zahn. So for questions 1 and 3, the resources available, where are they being diverted to? And number 3, regarding the 988, Natasha and Captain McKinney, if you guys could address that, and Major Papachow will address the NORCOM partnership after that.
Do you want me to start it? So regarding the landing zones, yes, we do need more landing zones. We do need an option for somebody who is in crisis or needs some sort of immediate sort of mental health intervention, and we don't have that. However, that being said, the reason that CCAT was able, sometimes a diversion from a hospital or jail is leaving somebody exactly where they are. It's actually spending the time to sit and talk to them, listen to them, have them calm down, de-escalate them, get them connected to a family member. Sometimes that's the diversion. It's just that often patrol officers don't have the time, the training, or the partnership to do that. The other thing that CCAT to do is they could give somebody a ride to the day center, to CFH, you know, or get them there. So yes, absolutely, we need more. And we were still able to make those diversions without that because of the time and the flexibility to be able to do some different things. Regarding 988, we hope that we're positioning ourselves to do that. So there is a Correspondent Outreach Alliance, which is a statewide alliance that is a membership organization for folks who are doing this kind of work. And Senator Tina Orwell has been very involved in the 988 legislation and has made sure that members of what we call the CROA Alliance are on her advisory committees and are part of those conversations to talk about how co-responders can be involved in responses for the 988 system and for the 988 call centers. So we've made sure that co-responders are part of that conversation, which we hope will position us to be eligible for those funds as they come along. Does that answer?
Yeah, it does help. I just wanted to make sure that we really, you know, it's always related to funding and funding shortfalls, right? And so making sure that we're positioned well. Thanks.
And I'm Captain McKinney.
I think just to piggyback really quickly on as far as the landing zones, of course, I mean, we do need more facilities out there, but I think one of the really great things about CCAT was that the partnerships that we have or that are out there, the resources that are out there, they came to the forefront. And so if there was a resource that CARES knew about that police didn't know about, for example, I had it written down here, One Call, where officers or mental health professionals can call and get information on the client. That really helps when you have to involuntarily commit someone or understand what they're facing. And so what happened was that police officers may have had resources that the mental health professionals didn't know about, and it just really was able to expand their knowledge on what they could do for these individuals. And so they had more options than we had before.
Wonderful, thank you.
To address
Okay.
To address
Go ahead, Major, I'm sorry.
My apologies. To address the NORCOM question, we actually developed a dual process for this, so that if the call came in and was triaged as a clear mental health call, the dispatcher would dispatch. Actually, I should say that it's actually 3 different ways. The NORCOM could dispatch it as to CCAT directly. The second option is once it was dispatched to a normal police officer. If a CCAT unit heard that and they heard something in it that triggered, hey, this could be something, they could jump the call. They could cancel the patrol officer and go instead. And the third thing we set up was that at any point in time, a patrol officer, when they got there and realized it wasn't what they got sent to, which happens quite a lot in law enforcement, they were able to back off, call the CCAT unit to come deal with the situation then. So we could actually bring CCAT in at any point in time from dispatch to officer arrival or even after officer arrival. We developed that so that it wasn't a one touch. It was multiple levels that could be caught if it needed to be diverted. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. My apologies, Mayor, for interrupting you.
No, I interrupted you. Okay, thank you. Deputy Mayor, followed by Councilmember Stokes and then Councilmember Lee.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you, Major Papachuk, for that great explanation. That was going to be one of my questions, if we could be that nimble where we could change en route or once we got there. So that's a excellent explanation. Thank you all for the great presentation tonight and just a very thoughtful way that you approach this this pilot and also this study. And I really look forward to seeing that final study and analysis report, which sounds like it's going to have a much more further data detailing and statistics, which I just really look forward to seeing as well. And also the outreach part here. I'm glad we're also putting this up on engaging the Bellevue website. That's important, as well as the policy advisory councils. Would love to hear, and maybe this is in your plans already, to kind of wrap in the feedback you get from the advisory councils into that final report. I'm not sure if that's part of your process or not, but certainly would like to review some of the feedback that you get from the advisory councils as well. That might be helpful. A couple other questions for you on, let's see, I think it was a slide, was it slide 8? Let me take a quick look here, sorry, to make sure I get the right number here. The number of client contacts and clients engaged, how much of that was repetitious in terms of you were saying the same client multiple times, or are the numbers there all unique touches? So that's one of my questions. And then also just kind of open-ended, I'm just kind of curious going into this, any, I guess, assumptions that might have been made, but then you discovered it wasn't exactly the way you thought it was going to go once you launched the program. So kind of maybe your biggest surprises out of developing the pilot, and maybe even what shifted during the pilot or what changes you made during the pilot in order to address some of those assumptions that were just not correct at the time or surprised you. So yeah, I'll stop there with my, I could ask a lot more, but again, great report, great presentation, and I'm very excited about this. Oh, one last question. In that final report, I'm assuming it will also have some numbers in terms of costs, in terms of the pilot, as well as ongoing costs as well. I'm assuming that that'll be part of it. Not that we need to get into that now, but I'm assuming that will be in that report. Thank you.
Thank you. So the first two questions regarding the unique touches and assumptions made or not, Captain McKinney and Natasha.
Sure, I'll go ahead and address the second piece of that in terms of the assumptions that we had. I think when we went into this, we thought that, these clients were going to want to talk to the mental health professional more than they'd want to talk to police. And Natasha mentioned it earlier, is that some people responded very, very well to the mental health professional, but there were people that actually wanted to talk to the police officer. They didn't want anything to do with the mental health professional. The other piece of it that we found out were when the new laws went into place, and we knew they were coming, but there was a little bit of hesitation with our CCAT officers because they were worried that they weren't going to be able to help someone that needed the help because we had to have that immediacy. So we had to deal with that emotional component for our teams because this is their job and this is what they love to do and they had the compassion for it. What we found is that it's actually a de-escalation tool. I mean, we know it's a de-escalation tool, but when we have those high liability events, let's say we have a suicidal subject with a gun, we have to send police officers if it's in the middle of a parking lot and in broad daylight and there's people around. That's just what we have to do. But what we found was we brought the CCAT team in with the mental health professional and they actually did the negotiation and we didn't ever have to use force. They were able to talk that individual down, get him services, and get him back home to his family in a safe environment. So those are just 3 small things. I mean, you could think that they were big too. There were a lot of lessons learned because, again, this is a very new, innovative program that no one else with the CARES model has tried that we know of in this state. So it's always changing, it's always evolving. And, when we find out something isn't working, we'll tweak it and and we'll be flexible with it.
So I would add that I can speak for one of my MHPs. One surprise, I'll be honest, she was concerned. She wasn't sure what this was going to be like. You know, she's spent a lot of time with Bellevue PD, but that's one thing. It's another thing to be in a car with them 10 hours a day. And she was a little bit worried about what's it going to be like to get out there. What if we get out there and we don't agree? And in the end, she said, I was so surprised. I loved it. I loved working with him. And I, you know, she wished it that it continued. She really enjoyed that. And she felt like they really complemented each other and that they were really great partners. So that was one thing. And then just to answer your question about the numbers, we had 239 clients who are engaged in total. So, and then the 1,700 contacts were, again, I don't have the data in front of me of how many of those were repeats with them versus on their behalf, but that there was obviously some folks who we saw, you know, more than who we saw more than once. But there was 239 in those 4 months who were new folks. Who we saw.
And lastly, regarding the cost, while the cost analysis won't be part of the final report, there will be cost analysis done.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Stokes, followed by Councilmember Lee, and then Councilmember Robertson.
Yeah, I mean, team, this is fantastic. A lot of good questions asked already. I won't go over those. But to me, I just don't have any questions. This is something we have to do. It's just amazing. And to put it together in such a short time and have these results are very, very good. And I think it has a lot of impact for a lot of reasons. You know, getting people, helping people avoid criminal activity or deflecting from, you know, having to go to jail or putting them in hospitals or getting in hospitals and things, and getting service to them and actually having them. You mentioned something about people came out and wanted to talk to police, and you see a lot of situations that just blew up, and the people who were involved, the individuals, the citizens said, I just wanted to talk to somebody. And you know, you get into that situation and so I think we're looking at something that can really, I think, transform the way we do this. And the interesting thing, it popped in my head on listen when I read this thing over, was going way back in time to TV shows, Emergency, Paramedics, Car 55, Dragnet, where kind of concepts like these were being talked about, you know, and Emergency was the first time they started using paramedics going out with the fire department. And this is something that has been kind of out there, but you've taken this whole idea and really made it work. And so that the police are truly out there to serve and to help and to deal with actual criminal activity very effectively, and not spending time on things that need to be addressed in other ways. So it's just fantastic. And I really appreciate it, and I do hope that we continue this. And I think in the financial aspect, what we'll find is that we're getting more done with the same or less money in a sense. And we're putting the police really engaged directly in real criminal activity and things that need to be dealt with will be a big thing forward, you know, going forward too. It's just exciting that Bellevue is doing this and leading this. And I'm really proud of it and proud of everything you've done. And look forward to having these discussions going forward. So thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Lee, followed by Councilmember Robertson.
Thank you. Well, when I was first briefed a week ago, I was really excited about this program. This is really going back to the basics of policing. It's community policing, way back when. Police officers are the protectors, problem solvers, taking care of our community and our people, individuals and families who cannot otherwise protect themselves. So I think this working together with fire, with you know, MHP and with police, and you know, this is amazing. And I think this is a really attacking and addressing a very, very fundamental question that has been brought up, you know, during the last few years and longer than that, obviously, But it's really focusing on something where you need to be drastically to look how with the society has changed, things have changed, ways of doing things have changed. It's getting a lot more complex, obviously. So we need to come up with newer ways of doing old things, which is the community policing. When I've been in the council 30 years ago, that's what we started talking about. But now it's maybe really going to happen. So I want to give a lot of kudos, a lot of compliment to both chiefs for doing this, instituting. And, we have a lot of questions because I heard you said repeatedly, this is something new. I think Captain McKinney said that. It's new, it's innovative, it's ever changing. There's no pat answers to a lot of questions we will have. And I don't expect you to answer any questions for me tonight. Otherwise, we'll be here for all night, all week. And so don't worry about it. But I'm really impressed to emphasize the things that we want to accomplish, which you already articulated in increase diversion rate from hospital and jail and decrease use of force. Those two things are already important enough to warrant us to look at new ways of doing things. And all the things they're doing is pilot program. It's working on it. I don't even want to call it a pilot. I think it's just the beginning of a new program. So that's why I'm curious, as a Councilmember Boxdale asked, is this going to be one-shot deal? Done, that's it? Where are the resources going to continue this? I would really like to see this continue. This is the new program, but we cannot do it just jumping right to it. We don't know how to do it. We have to do it slowly, gradually. Ever-changing environment, creative, innovative, by working with the clients, working with partners. And as you mentioned, some partners think it might not really work, but as you get into it, if we do it the right way, if we find the right partners, if we ask the right questions, some of the questions already asked by council members, they're all good questions, but hey, I'm not going to ask questions now, but you guys will be asking the right questions. You guys are supposed to be. You guys have to have the resources, which we as council members have to look at how to make it possible for you so that you can continue to do this. And pieces of it, which you will think of doing it. If you don't, some of us will probably bring it up, which is we need to know the statistics. We know what we're getting. We need to see what are the real problems. And so we can work on the real solutions. These are the things we are finding, we're discovering. And that will give us the next solution, the next step. So I think that's all I'm going to say. I'm very excited about it. That's the beginning of this program, which has the promise of solving the big questions and concerns we've been faced with. The whole nation is. So I compliment you for doing that and give us the information. You're experts, all of you know, because you're right on the ground. You're actually doing it with the clients, knowing what you need to do. So come back to us, check back with us regularly, and let us know, let the city manager know what you need, and we can talk about those things. We can all become smart. We can all solve the problem together. So thank you. I'm very excited about it.
Thank you, Councilmember Lee. Councilmember Robertson.
Thank you. I join my colleagues in my enthusiasm for this program. And I think you can hear from all of us how proud we all are of our police and fire departments because of the work that you guys do. And this is a great example of that. This is such a great program, one that I think really honors the culture that we try to facilitate here in Bellevue with our first responders, which is to build trust with the community, to protect, to serve, to be that guardian mentality. And I think that this it hits all those notes. So I'm really looking forward to the data and the report. And I know that as that is being analyzed and considered, that the one-to-one outreach by our officers will continue to the people who are at risk. We're figuring out a better way to serve the public. So I'd like to talk just a brief moment. I'm just going to make comments because all the questions have been answered. But the data and the report that's coming, I want to think about what we're going to use that for. Certainly, I'd like that to come back to council when it's done so that we can share. You can share with us and it shares with the public all of that additional information. We're obviously going to use it to do outreach, which I think is excellent. But I also think that we should think about it as a communication piece. Or creating a communication piece that comes out of that, whether it's internal to our public or external, even further to the legislature, on showing how great this program is and maybe getting some funding, whether it's state or federal funding, whether it's grant funding from other resources, county levy money for this sort of thing. I think we need to think about maybe working with the government affairs office when the report and data is ready to figure out how we communicate this out, because I think this is one of those ways where Captain McKinney said Bellevue's the only city in the state who had the CARES program, which we've had for 9 years, and then we're doing the CCAT on top of it. And it seems to have been a very effective program. And so sharing that out, and sharing it out to the council as we deliberate, and the public as we deliberate the next biennial budget, I think will also be really important. So I hope that that's going to happen. And if one of the chiefs or someone from the city manager's office wants to respond to just how are we going to use the report and how are we going to communicate it out, that would be really helpful. But I'm really looking forward to seeing the results, and thank you guys all for the work.
Thank you. And yeah, and we certainly will be in discussions as to how we're going to communicate that out. You make some great points that I've taken good notes on. So thank you.
Okay, I have two questions here. I'm, representing Bellevue on the Mental Illness Drug Dependency Board. I saw the pilot program that we had before this, where we did mental health triage inside the police department, and that was very successful, and then we lost the funding for it. So if this indeed is a successful pilot, I just think that we're all very interested in figuring out how to continue it with funding. And I know that it's on our state ledge agenda to get funding for, and I know that Senator Cantwell is supporting this at the federal level. So I think we just all need to advocate for the funding for this. But my two questions to you are, one, it sounds very successful, but I'd like to know exactly how are you measuring success? What are your parameters for success, your indicators of success? And then number two, I know that not everybody that you work with this program is experiencing homelessness, but for those clients that are and who are having a mental health crisis or any other kind of crisis, how do you envision partnering with our agencies and our shelters and our permanent supportive housing providers to provide the support and the stability that these individuals need?
Natasha, you want to start with that one, please?
Sure. Thanks for asking that question. I actually was on the phone with the director of the case managers for the Congregations for the Homeless today to actually talk about that. So we're having weekly meetings to be able to make sure that we're not duplicating services, that we know who we need to get releases of information signed, obviously, but that we know who each other is working with and that we are able to support each other and make sure that folks are getting the services that they need and that we're doing what we can do to support them and that CFH is doing what they can do to support them. So we are, as far as our follow-up, because honestly, our caseload of unhoused folks has increased significantly. So we really are looking to our community partners, and they're looking to us as well when things start to go south with folks who are on site. They're calling and requesting CCAT or CARES to come out and be helpful in that way as well. So that's how we're starting, is with our weekly meetings. And then of course, also Stephanie was tied into that, Stephanie Ortiz, and we'll of course be tying in her replacement and whatever new LTs hired in that position to make sure that we're all kind of have a team that are wrapping around people.
I'll just say, before we get an answer to my other question, thank you for your response. And I'll just say, I think we'd all be very interested in knowing what the numbers are for, because we know that people can't recover if they're not stably housed. And so everybody on this council is very interested in getting individuals stably housed. And we're funding permanent supportive housing and building the new shelter. I think we're going to need to know the numbers of what the need is out there. And it's going to be really critical to our future policy decisions to know that. So I look forward to getting that data.
And Major Papajoff or Captain McKinney, just a few indicators of success regarding the pilot program.
Sure. So first off, we were looking at specifically the diversion. And part of that diversion process was not just, is the person not being arrested for a crime that they may be committing, or one of those, for example, criminal trespass charge where someone just won't leave a property. But we're looking at how well that person can go into the service. For example, if that person does need to go to Overlake Hospital, are we actually liaising with Overlake Hospital ahead of time? And is there a relationship built with Overlake Hospital so when I bring that person in, can they go through the process more smoothly? And that's a key indicator for us, is not the diversion process, but the smoothness of that person, is how that person is being treated at the hospital. So it's not just the diversion process, it's working on the entire flow. So is that person going through the process? A piece of this too is looking at individuals to see if is that individual itself getting better over time? Our trial was only for 4 months, so we don't have that long-term effect or that long-term analysis of is this person studying person X and seeing if that person X gets better over time. And that's absolutely something, if this was a continuing program beyond this, be looking at individuals and is that person accepting treatment? Are we seeing results? And what we saw a lot of times was that the police department is dealing with the same people the fire department is. There wasn't a communication. And that was when we were looking at how effective this program was, are we actually seeing a positive result for that person? Are we getting them the resource? Are they getting out? That's a larger piece. So for the trial, though, we knew we could focus on diversion rates, is how often that person's being diverted. We can focus on use of force, and we can focus on those indicators that we could only get within that 4-month trial.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I think the data, the research shows that there's only a 10% permanent success rate with individuals who are not housed when they're receiving supportive services. So it's maybe not a good indicator of success to look at that unless we are able to get them into housing first. But certainly the recidivism and the ability to provide compassionate care is a great success story. Well, thank you very much for this presentation, and we're all going to be advocating for the funding, I know. We look forward to getting report back on the actual data. Okay, we have Mr. Miyake. Did you want to well, the next one are the regional issues, and that is in our packet. There is no presentation, but Lacey Jane is on the call here in case you have any questions or comments. So does anybody have a question or comment on our what's in the packet? Not seeing any, we will move on. And we are moving on to land use. I'd like to take a break. It is 7:30, so let's come back at 7:40. Okay, let's get started. Mr. Miyake, would you like to introduce the first land use ordinance?
Yes, under land use, you have Ordinance 6625, which is related to a quasi-judicial rezone. And given the quasi-judicial nature, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Kathy Gerler, our city attorney, to introduce this item, Mayor. Kathy?
Thank you, Mr. Miyake. Good evening, Mayor Robinson and council members. The item that's before you tonight is a final action on the Safeguard Self-Storage Rezone application. In this matter, the applicant seeks to rezone a 6.4 acre site that is located in the Crossroads sub area from office to community business. And this rezone is one of several you've seen lately that's intended to implement and further the comprehensive plan amendments that the council approved a year ago. You might recall at your November 22nd meeting, Riley Pittman from the Development Services Department presented a staff report on this rezone application, and the matter is now before you for a final decision. This is a process 3 quasi-judicial matter. The hearing examiner recommends approval with one condition, and no appeal of that recommendation has been filed. This is a closed record proceeding, so the council's decision must be based on the record that is before the hearing examiner. The alternatives available to you, as well as the decision criteria, were presented in your packet materials, as well as a proposed ordinance 6625 should the council choose to approve this rezone. So before I turn it over, Mayor, to the council for deliberation and a vote, because this is a quasi-judicial matter, I would recommend that council be given an opportunity to disclose any any ex parte communications on the record.
Okay, thank you, Kathy. So does anybody have ex parte communications to disclose on this? Not seeing any, we can move on. Did you want to say anything else, Kathy?
No, Mayor, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, so this, I believe, is our third look at this, and it's, as she said, based on the hearing examiner's criteria and his report, which is all in our packet. So does anybody have any questions or comments about this? I'm not seeing any. Deputy Mayor, could you make a motion, please?
Certainly, Mayor. I move to approve the application and adopt Ordinance 6625, approving with a condition the rezone application of Safeguard Self-Storage, a rezone of a 6.4 acre site located at 1015 164th Avenue Northeast from office to community business.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Good, thank you. Okay, so next we're on to other ordinances. Mr. Miyake, go ahead.
Sure. Thank you, Mayor and council members. We have 2 matters under other ordinances and resolutions to cover with you this evening and for final action. The first one is related to land use code for purposes of advancing the C1 action of the affordable housing strategy. That is Ordinance 6626. Which is 12A on your agenda this evening. This topic was last discussed with the council at the November 15th study session, where staff were directed by council to bring back the ordinance for final action this evening. So joining us this evening is Mike Brennan, Director, Trisna Tanis, Consulting Attorney, and Christina Gallant, Senior Planner, all from the Development Services Department. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Mike to tee this up. Mike?
Thank you, Mr. Miyake. Good evening, Mayor Robinson, Deputy Mayor Ewenhouse, and council members. As Mr. Miyake mentioned, this is an ordinance that we are seeking final action from the council tonight, which implements the first phase of the council's affordable housing strategy C1. Essentially what this does is it adds a 50% density bonus to properties that are owned by faith-based organizations, nonprofits, and public agencies. It is the first phase and will be a 2-phased approach. This sets a base bonus density of 50% for those properties. We'll be returning early next year to discuss the second phase of this work, which would be targeted rezones or map amendments for properties to increase the base zoning density allowed on those properties. Those would be adjacent to arterials and other properties that could accept additional or higher density. So again, next slide, please. So again, we are seeking your action this evening on ordinance number 6626 to initiate this density bonus. So I'm going to hand over, we've got a brief staff report, so I'm going to hand it over to Trisna Tanis, I believe, to continue with the staff report this evening. Trisna?
Thank you, Mike. Good evening, Mayor Robinson, Deputy Mayor Newhouse, council members. We do have a short presentation tonight for you. We will start by recalling council direction on November 15th, and we will explain the elements of the LUCA ordinance next and go through the anticipated outcomes of this ordinance and wrap up with kind of a recap of the public engagement and the process that we've gone through. So as Mike noted, on November 15th, Council did provide us direction when we first introduced this affordable housing density, the C1 LUCA. The C1 action as part of the affordable housing strategy, as I'm sure you all recall, calls for increasing affordable housing development on certain eligible properties. So there is future work with this action, phase 2, that is coming up later, early next year. And we would be looking to launch that C1 comprehensive city initiated map amendments for those certain properties that are well suited for upzoning and for development of affordable housing on those. So currently we are here in front of you tonight looking for action on this phase 1, the affordable housing LUCA. And we hope to be able to get a final action from council tonight to adopt this ordinance. So with that, I'm actually going to turn over the presentation to Christina Gallant to go through the elements of the ordinance and some of additional information. Christina?
Thank you, Trisna. So tonight, just going through a high-level overview of the LUCA components. In order to be eligible for the density bonus, all housing units in the project would need to be permanently affordable housing, affordable to households at 80% area median income or below. Eligibility differs by owner category between land use districts. In single family land use districts, only land owned by a religious organization can be eligible. In districts that allow multifamily housing that expands, so land owned by a religious organization, nonprofit organization, or public agency are eligible. This would be a by right density bonus of 50%. And that means that projects that meet the eligibility criteria can be eligible for the bonus without any additional process beyond what is otherwise required for their project. We have also proposed some flexibility for certain dimensional standards in order to help physically accommodate those additional housing units. And final major point, we have proposed that in the single family districts, duplexes and triplexes can represent up to half of the units in the subdivision. A couple anticipated outcomes we see. First, of course, action C1 from the Affordable Housing Strategy to increase development potential on suitable land owned by public agencies, faith-based and nonprofit housing entities for affordable housing. This is a first phase in implementing that action, with phase 2 to come next year. And second key outcome, this LUCA would conform the land use code with RCW 3663-300. Next slide. We employed 3 modes of public engagement on this project. First, the necessary process for requirements for notice of application, the EBCC courtesy hearing, and a planning commission public hearing. We also employed direct engagement and feedback with representatives of the faith community, nonprofit housing providers, and members of the public. And finally, we had an online presence through Engaging Bellevue and a dedicated project webpage. Next. A reminder of our process to date. Again, this was a process for action. We held 3 study sessions with the Planning Commission from April to June of this year. We had a courtesy hearing with EBCC in September, followed by a public hearing with the Planning Commission as well. We held a study session with the City Council on November 15th, which brings us today with our request for action. Following action, we will go back to the EBCC at a future date for a public hearing and approval disapproval decision. And also to come in a future meeting, we're looking forward to the phase 2 launch. Next slide. And thank you. That brings us to the end of our presentation. Mayor Robinson, I will defer to you.
Thank you very much. Great presentation. So what we're proposing here is really kind of the bare minimum to comply with the state mandate for the land use code. Am I right?
Trisna, do you want to respond to the state requirements on this?
Yes, absolutely. So the RCW requires that cities provide an affordable housing development density bonus, but it did not specify the amount of bonus. So while we are complying with the state regulations, because there is no specific, there's no bright line kind of number or a percentage of bonus, we feel like we are in fact being consistent with that state regs. It's just, it's hard to answer it in that is just that narrow compliance.
I understand. Okay, thank you for explaining that. So any comments or questions on this? I'm not seeing any, and you've made it clear. Okay, Councilmember Robertson, I'll just say you've made it clear that we'll be looking at this again in the first or second quarter of next year to see if in certain areas we can go even increasing the density even further and have those conversations, which I know our Planning Commission hope for, and so do our church groups. So go ahead, Councilmember Robertson.
I was just going to make that same point, that this is just the start. So we're going to be looking at this again next year. So thank you for making that for me.
Okay. Okay. So Deputy Mayor, would you like to make a motion, please?
Certainly, Mayor. I move to adopt Ordinance 6626, amending Land Use Code Chapter 20.10, Land Use Districts, Chapter 20.20, General Development Requirements, Chapter 20.25, Special and Overlay Districts, and Chapter 20.50, Definitions, to establish a density bonus and additional modifications to other standards and requirements for affordable housing developments on certain public, nonprofit, or religious organization-owned properties.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Great, that passes. So we have another ordinance, and attached to that ordinance are other ordinances. So I'll let Mr. Miyake explain this.
Sure. Mayor, ordinances 6627, 6628, 6629, and 6630 all relate to the adoption of the Eastman Land Use Code. Joining us this evening to walk us through the ordinances and to talk about how they all fit together, we have Mike Brennan, Trisna Tanis, and Nick Whipple, all from the Development Services Department, as well as Matt Cummins and Emil King from Community Development. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Mike so he could, again, walk us through these and explain how all these are going to work together. Mike?
Thank you, Mr. Miyake. This is a group of ordinances that we're bringing forward tonight for final action on the East Main Land Use Code Amendment. Just take a quick pause for a minute here to recognize that this has been a long process that has really involved a lot of people and essentially thousands of hours of time from our community members, business interests, property owners, housing and affordable housing advocates, the city council, and certainly the staff. It is good to be here. I'm excited that we are at a place where we can bring before the council these final ordinances for your consideration for final adoption. Next slide. As Mr. Miyake mentioned in his introduction, there are multiple ordinances that are necessary to implement the East Main Land Use Code Amendment to create the East Main TOD neighborhood. The first one, 6627, is the LUCA, or the Land Use Code Amendment, which is the kind of the big piece of legislation that puts in place the codes and standards for the East Main area. Below that would be the 6628, which is a rezone that puts in place the land use designations in the city code. And 6629 and 6630 are conformance amendments to make the appropriate references within those codes of the new zoning designations that are created for East Main, so that we can appropriately enforce those codes within the East Main area once that rezoning has occurred. Adoption of the initial ordinance would be necessary to make the ordinances below that relevant. So action to pass the initial ordinance would be necessary before you would act on any of the additional ordinances this evening or at a later date if that's necessary. So I'm going to hand over the presentation. We do have a brief presentation to walk the council through the East Main Land Use Code Amendment and the associated ordinances. So I will hand it to Trisna to continue the staff presentation. Trisna.
Thank you, Mike. Good evening again, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, Council members. For our agenda for this East Main package of code amendments, we will begin by describing the context of East Main, so including the area and the vision, and recap the timeline and the progression of the East Main code amendments in the last half of this year, specifically, and where we are tonight. We'll then give an overview of the East Main LUCA ordinance and follow with the description of the companion ordinances, the Rezone, the noise control code, and sign code ordinances. And as Mike explained, Council will be asked to take action on these companion ordinances if Council does adopt the LUCA ordinance. Next slide, please. As Council is considering this package of East Main code amendments, we want to begin by recalling the East Main context. The East Main Transit-Oriented Development, or TOD area, is bounded by Main Street and downtown to the north, Southeast 8th and Mercer Street to the south, and then 114th Southeast and I-405 to the east, with 112 and the single-family neighborhoods of Surrey Downs to the west. Also noting that there is the adjacent East Main Light Rail Station right across the street from 112. And there's also the Lake Trail and the Lake Washington Loop Trail very close to and adjacent to the East Main area. The vision for the East Main TOD neighborhood is to create a vibrant and livable, memorable neighborhood with a great mix of uses, including housing choices and commercial uses such as offices, hotels, and services. And that the neighborhood will be pedestrian friendly with small walkable blocks and connected pathways so that it will be easy to get in and around the station area. Next slide, please. With this vision and the light rail coming soon, Council expressed an interest in moving the East Main code amendments forward as efficiently and quickly as possible. And so that Council has made completing the East Main a priority. So including keeping the processing of these amendments. And Council has followed through with this prioritization, giving input and making decisions along the way. And this past few months, as Council has explored a number of complex issues and topics for the East Main package of code amendments. And on November 15th, Council directed staff to prepare the East Main amendments for final action, where we are here tonight. Next slide, please. So per this direction, we have prepared the East Main code amendments with all the previous Council input and decisions for Council's consideration and action. The first ordinance, as explained earlier, is the LUCA ordinance, which is the bulk of what Council has focused on these past number of months. The LUCA ordinance does create a new Part 2025Q in the Land Use Code and contains requirements, standards, and guidelines for developments in East Main. Also, as mentioned earlier, if Council does adopt the LUCA ordinance, Council will then be asked to adopt the 3 companion ordinances, the Rezone, and then the sign code and noise control code conformance amendments. Next slide, please. With that, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Planning Manager Nick Whipple, who will explain the package of code of ordinances in more detail. Nick.
Great, thank you, Trisna, and good evening, Mayor Robinson, Deputy Mayor Noonhouse, and members of the council. So this slide for LUCA Ordinance 6627, this is providing an overview of the planning efforts for the East Main Station area with the comprehensive plan amendment that was adopted in May of 2019. The comprehensive plan really established the blueprint for how this area will transition with light rail over the next few decades. The comprehensive plan amendment looked at East Main as a significant opportunity for placing housing and affordable housing close to transit, and set forth a vision for how this area could redevelop over time into a walkable, safe, vibrant, transit-oriented development area where you would have housing and offices, places for people to shop, enjoy being outside, and also have strong connections through the TOD with new paths and smaller walkable blocks, new roadways, and connections, of course, to transit. Tonight, the council is being asked to take a very big implementation step, which is to adopt the land use code for the East Main area and implement the vision that was established in the comprehensive plan. It took some time for us to draft the zoning for this area. We've had 7 touch points with council and a public hearing just over the past year and a half. And we're excited to be here tonight with the complete draft land use code chapter, which is inclusive of all of council's feedback over the past year and a half. The LUCA is largely based off of the Downtown Code Chapter 2025A, and it will create a new part 2025Q in the Land Use Code. This part will describe what land uses are permitted to contribute to the livability of the TOD. It will also set standards for development, such as building height, floor plate sizes, minimum housing, block sizes, design guidelines. All of those standards will enable a range of development scenarios to occur within the TOD. The chapter will provide exceptions for existing uses. The Bellevue Club, for example, may continue to expand without needing to meet East Main specific development standards that conflict with the club's ongoing operations, as we discussed in prior council meetings. And then lastly, the Land Use Code Amendment provides for departures from the Land Use Code through the development agreement option. So if a property owner chooses to redevelop and propose a project that doesn't meet the development standards, such as building heights or block sizes, for example, then the development agreement offers a path for the city to consider a redevelopment proposal, and council may choose what the public benefit trade-off will be for that proposal, which includes at a minimum more affordable housing than what the baseline code would provide. So we don't know exactly how property owners will choose to redevelop their properties over time. It depends largely on market forces. So the approach to this LUCA is to build flexibility in the baseline code with the DA option, the development agreement option, available to be responsive when market conditions change, or a developer is wanting to attract a special tenant with specific needs that may not meet all of the aspects of the code. And once the land use code amendment is adopted, a developer may submit their actual design concept for city approval. And just as a reminder for community members listening in, tonight we do not have a specific development application for this area. This is a policy action, not a development proposal that the city council will be acting on. It is a set of regulations based on the vision, goals, and policies established in the comprehensive plan, which will guide the future development in this TOD. So the next 3 slides will walk through the companion ordinances that go along with the Land Use Code Amendment ordinance. These ordinances, as mentioned earlier, are necessary to fully implement the LUCA that council's been reviewing the past several months. So with the Rezone Ordinance 6628, this shows a map overview of the East Main area and the proposed rezoning for the parcels in this area. As mentioned earlier, this is a roughly 60-acre area of the city west of the East Main Light Rail Station. It's currently zoned for office and limited business. The area does consist of 4 hotels, many surface parking lots, the Bellevue Athletic Club, and multiple office buildings. Ordinance 6628 would rezone the 60 acres into 2 new land use districts for consistency with the comprehensive plan. And the new districts include the East Main Transit Oriented Development Higher Density District, that's the EMTOD High land use designation, which is closest to the new light rail station and covers the area between Main Street to the north and Southeast 6th to the south, and then bounded by 112th and 114th. And then the second district is the East Main TOD Low or Lower Density District, which includes 3 parcels south of Southeast 6. The lower density district is further from the light rail station. And as you can see on the map, it does have a lot of green space there. That's mainly wetlands and Sturvant Creek that runs through there as well. So the lower designation is responsive to the conditions of those properties. And then for the noise control Ordinance 6629. This is another companion amendment to incorporate the East Main land use districts in the noise control code. This ordinance will add the 2 land use districts into the city code. It is more of a procedural type amendment so that these districts are regulated for noise control. And the last companion ordinance is the sign code ordinance number 6630. This is an amendment to the city sign code to add the East Main TOD High and East Main TOD Low land use districts into the sign code for purposes of regulating signage. The amendments provide requirements for East Main that are identical to the requirements for downtown. And so with that, I will turn it back to Mike to conclude the staff presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. Again, we are seeking council final action initially on Ordinance 6627, which is the East Main Land Use Code Amendment. We are here to answer any questions that the council may have, and I'll hand it back to the mayor, Mayor Robinson.
Okay, thank you for that. So I know that we have some amendments that are going to be brought up tonight. So I'd like to, normally we don't do a motion in the beginning, but we are going to start with a motion to approve, and then we will make amendments as requested. So Deputy Mayor, could you start with a motion, please, to adopt?
Certainly, Mayor. I move to adopt Ordinance 6627, amending the Land Use Code to create a new Part 20.25Q East Main to establish requirements, standards, and design guidelines to implement the new East Main transit-oriented development. Amending Luke 20.10.020 land use districts and Luke 20.25H.045 critical areas overlay district for consistency with the new Part 20.25Q Luke.
Second.
Okay, so I'm going to open this for discussion. Are there any amendments that would like to be brought forward? I see Deputy Mayor, you have your hand up, and then we'll work on that one first, Councilmember Robertson, and then we'll do yours second. So Deputy Mayor, would you like to propose your amendment?
Certainly, thank you. And I'm not sure staff wants to bring up the slide, which might detail a little bit more about the amendment as well. But first, I want to thank my colleagues and the incredible work that staff has done in getting us to this point of passing East Main Luca here. This is a momentous occasion, something we've been working on for quite some time. So just wanted to say that first, and certainly appreciate my colleagues' consideration of this amendment this evening. So my amendment is really based on the stakeholders' request for a reasonable adjustment to the block length and perimeter requirement so that they could accommodate a grocery store. As noted in the slide here, the current code language could easily be changed to keep the staff proposed block size and length requirement, but create an exception to accommodate a grocery store with its required parking. So I believe it's 20.25Q.100 under section 4 under exceptions. It literally would just increase from 200 to 350 feet and then allow also on Main Street in addition to 114th Avenue Southeast. So the reason I'm bringing this amendment forward tonight is that, well, first and foremost, a grocery store was one of the main amenities that the Surrey Downs neighborhood and the CAC wanted to see in East Main. And if you consider the 1,500 plus housing units that are going to go into East Main, the Surrey Downs neighborhood, and the numerous apartment buildings north of East Main, the demand will be very strong. And it's one of our goals as a council is getting closer to a 15-minute city with complete and connected neighborhoods. And this certainly will help achieve part of that vision where residents can walk or bike from their home to this grocery store. It'll also change up the makeup and make it more viable for small retail or mom and pop shops, as some of the stakeholders referred to earlier during oral communications, and setting them up for success to flourish in East Main. And additionally, the East Main Comprehensive Plan already states to allow grocery store, entertainment, and retail and others to serve Bellevue neighborhoods as well as transit. And then the East Side Housing Roundtable had also had a recommendation that they independently recommended the block length and perimeter requirement be removed entirely, actually. And I'm not advocating that, but rather advocating for a small minor adjustment. So I know that some of my colleagues might think that the DA might be the proper process for this. However, there's a few items here that I think we should raise and discuss, and why I brought this up as an amendment. So, pushing the block length exemption for grocery to a future DA will force a grocery store or any grocery store that has interest in here to delay their commitment until the DA is approved, or they could delay housing by at least a couple of years while waiting for the DA. So to the walkaway due to uncertainty of not knowing if the EA will allow a grocery store. And if they do, it could take several years to find a similar anchor grocery store in East Main, which again could delay East Main development and new homes for several years. So bottom line, housing could be delayed in both cases. Therefore, including this minor, but I would say critical exception in the LUCA reduces the risk and increases certainty of developing East Main with housing quicker. Having housing delayed between anywhere from 2 to 5 years or even longer by not including this in the LUCA is not the scenario I think any of us on the council, the city, or the stakeholders wants to see happen. So finally, we listened during the MFTE process that brought the developers, the affordable housing advocates together in order to update the incentives that would provide more affordable housing to Bellevue. So I simply ask that we do the same thing here, that we listen to some of these experts, stakeholders, neighborhoods, and individuals who were part of the CAC, and to the grocery store owners who understand what it will take for them to be successful at this location. So again, thank you for your consideration, and thank you for considering this amendment. Thank you.
I have a clarifying question. Is this something that would be, if a grocery store is proposed, we would, the exemption would take effect? Or
Correct.
just, or even if a grocery store wasn't proposed, it'd just be across the board, an exemption?
This is specifically for a grocery store.
So only if a grocery store is proposed would this amendment take effect?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. So any comments or questions? I see Councilmember Lee. I see Councilmember Barksdale. I see Councilmember Robertson. And I see Councilmember Stokes and Zahn. Go ahead, Councilmember Lee.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I strongly second the amendment. I believe we've heard the developer and we've heard the amendment. Deputy Mayor very articulately stated the reasons where this is necessary. One of the elements, I don't want to go over everything, but the key is that the grocery store is essential. It's the financial viability, of the project. We know that financing is very key to doing anything of this size of project. People are going to look at financial feasibility to make sure that they lend money so that they can get the money back. And I think the developer already are investing major resource investment, their dollar to the project. And they're not going to do it unless it's financially feasibility. They see a return in the financial investment. So I believe that if we want to see this area developed, if we want to see the amenities that the city council want, housing, and the wonderful concept of having this project, we want to be sure that it meets the condition. And another thing that we haven't talked about, maybe it was, I don't remember if this deputy manager, mayor said, Eco Northwest did a financial feasibility analysis. The analysis indicated also in the importance of having, this amenity to be included, the grocery store, in order to make this project feasible. So I believe, in addition to what the deputy mayor said, and I think we need to emphasize ultimately whether we're going to have this project or not, depending on the financial feasibility. And so I strongly support this, and I believe it still maintains the thing that we're looking for, walkability. And I believe that there's some concern about maybe the size, the plate could be too large or whatever. It would decrease walkability and pedestrian, accessibility. I think these all can be addressed. It depends on the developer. If this is the thing that would attract people, would make the project successful, they would do everything, to make it successful. if it isn't, they're not going to do it. They're not going to, do the wrong thing that will not meet the city council's requirement and what we're looking for. So I think we agree.
Thank you, Councilmember Lee.
So I will support. Thank you.
All right, Councilmember Barksdale.
All right, thank you, Mayor. I generally support it. I guess I would just maybe circle back to your question. I don't think this applies triggered just for like when a grocery store applies. That being said, I'm curious about maybe having both of these instead of just replacing it. And for the second one where it says the 350 feet from 114th and Main Street, qualifying it to say something around, when there's a need because it can't otherwise be achieved, some unmet need in the community or neighborhood. So for example, the grocery store is a good example, but I think it's broader than that too. But the grocery store is a good example because it was something that's called out and would meet an unmet need for the neighborhood as called out in other plans.
So what are you suggesting?
Keeping the current exception, adding to the exceptions the 350 feet from 114th and Main Street, and saying when an unmet need consistent with the comp plan is met that can't be met otherwise, which would still leave room for
who defines what an unmet need is?
So in the comp plan, for example, it talks about having a grocery store in that area explicitly, as Deputy Mayor mentioned. So that would be an example of an unmet need, given that it doesn't exist within that area.
So something that's described already in the comp plan for this area?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, all right. Councilmember Robertson.
Thanks. This isn't what I raised my hand to talk about, but I support the, actually, we don't have the motion on the table, but I will support the motion to amend as presented by Deputy Mayor Neuenhuis when it is made. But I think that the amendment is good because the 200 feet block length is smaller than the standard block size in Seattle. And it's really small. And in order to have the floor plate size for a grocery store, you just have to have it bigger. But whether it's for a grocery store or something that would contain lots of little shops or whatever, I think that it's an important exception to make. And from my reading of it, it would apply regardless. And I think that's a good thing. I do not support adding vagueness to the code by saying some unmet need. I think it's a honorable idea, but I think it would not create certainty in the code. And it also, who decides what is needed? I mean, it's too vague. The other thing is that sometimes when development is happening, people are laying out their streets. Well, I guess you say all the time when development's happening, people are laying out their street, they're figuring out their infrastructure, and they may not know what goes in there. And what may go in there may change. So I think that we need to make a decision, 350, 200, whatever it is. I support the 350 exception near 114th and Main. I think it's really appropriate. And can I just say how excited I would be to have Met Market in Bellevue? We have a lot of great grocery stores here. It would be awesome for the people of downtown, the people of Surrey Downs, the people who are going to live in this TOD to have a good grocery store like Met Market or like, there's many others to choose from, but I would just love to have one here. And so I'm going to support the motion once it's made. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Stokes.
No, I appreciate the conversation so far, and I'm glad to see this has been kind of redirected from the original proposal, which would have just opened this up to any kind of development effectively. And I agree with the idea of a grocery store there, and if we can accommodate that, and yes, the Met Market would be a great addition to the whole piece. What I'd like to know, and appreciate Deputy Mayor's reduction of this to limit it at this stage to a grocery store. We can always, if it's put in that way, we can always come back in and do something else. I just don't want to, I would not agree to just open it up to, let's make the configuration as shown here. I wish we had a better map of that to look at. Who knows what would come next. I mean, this is a grocery store that people say they want to do, but we hear that all the time. So we're taking a risk on this, which I think in this case is a good one to take. And I trust that they will try to do that. I'm not quite sure, Councilmember Robertson, what kind of parameters you were putting on this, or I can't find it interesting if you're saying, let's go with the way that the deputy mayor proposed, but let's have some in the future. We can look at this. I think that's good. You're not proposing putting something else on there that would, at this stage, right?
I almost called you Mayor Stokes. Councilmember Stokes, I like it as it's written in the desk packet.
Okay.
Where I was just clarifying what I take away from reading what the desk packet is.
Yeah, no, that's okay. That's good. I appreciate that. I could go with this.
Well, I believe in the desk packet, it does not specify that it would have to be a grocery store. It could be anything. Am I correct?
Well, that's right. I thought we were amending. I mean, the motion.
Well, so I'm just being clear. You're saying you would support this if it specified
grocery store.
These exceptions for a grocery store.
Right.
Got it. Okay, Councilmember Zahn.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Well, this discussion is very helpful because I was also a little bit confused about what we were voting on, because the desk packet does not actually specify that this exception would only be for grocery stores, as the deputy mayor first mentioned. So I did want to understand, is the motion actually as written in the packet, or the language where this is only related to a grocery store? And with that said, I like what Councilmember Barksdale brought up, which is that if we tie the exception to what's in our comp plan, then that actually gives us an opportunity to look at neighborhood needs. And if it is more than a grocery store, it gives us that opportunity. So for me, I would support either this with the grocery store only that this exception applies to, or the tied to a comp plan for neighborhood need, but not a complete unlimited exception. Thanks.
Okay, so I agree that I would like to specify what would trigger this exception. And for me, a child care or a grocery store would trigger that. I think to preserve mom and pop shops, which is another goal, that's actually you're asking for smaller spaces. So I don't know that this would achieve that. But I think the two goals that I care about are the grocery store and the child care. If we want to call those out, we can, or we can just say grocery store, and then if a different need comes up, it can be accomplished through the DA.
Right.
So I guess those are the two options I care about. So Deputy Mayor, do you want to make a motion based on what you've heard from your colleagues?
I certainly can, but Mayor, just to clarify, so you want to be specific in terms of calling out a grocery store or childcare, and not, because I did hear some support for doing kind of unmet neighborhood needs. I understand that's a little bit more ambiguous.
For me, that's too vague.
That's okay.
But go ahead and make a motion, and then we can discuss it further.
Okay, I move to amend Section 3 of Ordinance 6627 to expand the portions of East Main exempt from block size and length requirements to 350 feet from 114th Avenue Southeast or Main Street in Luke 20.25Q.100.E.4.A for grocery or childcare purposes.
Second.
I would support second.
Okay. Is there a discussion or questions on that? Not okay, Councilmember Stokes. And then Robertson.
Yeah, and actually, I like the idea of putting the childcare piece in there on that, and would really like to find a way and hope that they will take that as a great idea and incorporate one anyhow. My question is, just want to make sure we put this specific exemption in here, and if either of those two things do not pan out, the developer can come back in and with the DA. There are ways to relook the project if these two fails, basically what I'm saying, or if they don't work out. Is that correct? Can somebody give me an answer?
Mike, do you want to answer that?
So, and I'll ask my colleagues on the call as well. So essentially, my understanding of the outcome that you're creating from this motion is that the draft requirements or the final ordinance that's in the packet would require that the block sizes would allow for block size exemption for 200 feet from 114th Avenue. And the allowance that you're providing with this motion would be for 350 feet from 114th and Main Street for grocery stores or childcare uses. That exception would be applied. So you would expand the area where the exception from blocks into that purple area for grocery stores and childcare uses. Other than that, the exception would apply to all uses within the blue area on this map. And I can explain that in a different way if that would be helpful, or if council understood. So again, in the purple area, the way that this motion was stated, that area you would be required to meet the block size requirement except for grocery stores and daycares. They would be exempted.
But
yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Can we move on? I can come back to you, Councilmember Stokes, or did you have a comment to follow up?
Right.
Okay. Councilmember Robertson, followed by Councilmember Lee.
Thank you. I came out saying I would support the motion, but I am going to be voting no on this because it makes no sense. The area that the exemption would apply for is a lot bigger than a grocery store or a childcare. And so you would have, you're putting things in the wrong order. The way you figure out the way you're going to lay things out and where you might put the grocery store, but you can't just have a block length that's small just in one little portion. You have to have continuous streets, and you don't know necessarily that you're going to have a Met Market in there or a childcare center. You create the space for it, you recruit those tenants, but you're building quite often, and you have to figure out where the roads are going to go before you're building. So, I mean, this would be, it's theater. If we pass this, it is absolute theater, because they will never be able to do it, because first of all, you're not going to put 7 grocery stores in a row in order to get the 350-foot block length, which is what you'd have to be. I know it's a good idea. If we want to set the table to have a grocery store come in, we have to set the table and trust that one will come in. We can't mandate it by some larger block length wherever they have it when they have the lease, which is after they've already built all the streets. I'm very frustrated by this, because it's like I said, it's theater to put it in there to think that it would actually have a meaningful impact. So unless we take the limitation out, I'm voting no. Thanks.
Councilmember Lee.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. That was my concern. I seconded the motion because I think we need to have a conversation. We don't know what the impact is or unintended consequence. I think that the developer asked for certain things for some specific reasons. And, my thought initially, the 2 questions to this. The amendment says and, or either one, or and or. That makes a big difference. Okay, even just hearing from Councilmember Robertson, I think it makes a lot of sense that even and or is still, if we're prescribing it, that would cause unintended consequence, which I don't know what might be. And I think we need to thoroughly vetted with the developer, understand what are we doing, that makes sense or doesn't make sense. So I would definitely be supporting Councilmember Robinson's position at this time. And I would still support the original motion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Barksdale.
All right, thank you, Mayor. I guess I just wanted to follow up with staff really quickly on the idea around saying unmet needs, just to see if there is a way to firm that up a little bit more so it would provide some of that flexibility. If not, all good. I also like the mayor's suggestion around calling out grocery stores and childcare, but I was just curious if there was a way to speak to unmet needs more concretely.
So I'll ask Nick, as far as other portions of the code, do we have any provisions that would be similar to that sort of a description that we would apply that discretion?
Not as of right, Councilmember Barksdale. I'm not aware of any that would grant that or would, I guess, provide that discretion to the director to determine what that unmet need is through a development agreement process. I think that would be perhaps a better mechanism to evaluate what that unmet need might be. But we do not have other places in the code, I guess, where we would offer that as an option.
Thank you.
Okay, so Mike, I'm going to ask you a question, and then I know Councilmember Stokes has his hand up, so I'll get to you again, Councilmember Stokes, and anybody else. But Mike, you know, understanding that we're trying to make it easy for a developer to put in a grocery store or a child care center, and I know we can do that through a DA. We've heard a bit of a protest because they seem to think it would jeopardize their ability to create an agreement in advance of the development and have the security of knowing who their tenants are going to be. So what do you think, knowing that the council wants to limit this opportunity to childcare, grocery store, or whatever else has been called out in the comp plan and the neighborhood visioning, that might be an essential need here. How best do you think the city can do that?
So first of all, it's a little challenging, Mayor, to answer the question since we don't have a development proposal in front of us. As you heard Councilmember Robertson, generally we're looking at site layout during the development process. So the code by right allows for grocery store development within the East Main area. The question is about the configuration. Again, there's lots of property here where a grocery store could land. Back to the exception. So in the light blue on the map, just to provide some more clarity if I can, block lengths and requirements are not required. They're exempted out of those areas shaded in blue. So you wouldn't have to build a road, a pedestrian path, mid-block connection, et cetera, in that area of the blue. You could build a very large base structure that would be uninterrupted in that area. So it allows by right the developer or the property owner to configure their buildings kind of as they see fit without those kind of openings. The exception that's being considered, that purple area, would be to expand that area where blocks are not required. So again, it would be the policy shift here is providing additional by right flexibility to the property owner and developer to lay out their site as they see fit. Again, expanding the area where that large base structure could occur without those cross connections, roads, or other things that would create the block configurations that was the policy direction that created the initial draft here. So again, this is something that, again, the shift or the policy shift here that's being discussed is expanding that area in which the developer would have the right to, by right, do those larger base structure development condition and trusting that you would get the type of development that the council is seeking in your vision for this area versus using, as was mentioned, the development agreement option where the council has the ability to make a determination as to whether or not that configuration being proposed for the grocery store, daycare, or other uses in that particular area would meet your goals for the East Main area. So again, it's a shift in the level of, let's say, continued oversight that the council would provide in how development proceeds.
So my other question is then, is East Main uniquely onerous? Because I imagine that when we look at Wilburton, when we look at Bel Red, there will be other developers of large properties that will be interested in putting the same type of services or tenants in their buildings. Are they going to have the same complaint, or do other developers find ways to do it with these types of confines, I guess?
So it's a good question. Again, not seeing the development proposal here that's being considered and creating the challenge, I guess, to site the grocery store in East Main. It's hard for me to answer that question. I don't know what constraints they're facing here. This area, again, by right in the code would allow the construction of a grocery store within the East Main area. So it's difficult, again, without that additional detailed information for me to answer the question whether there's a constraint that's insurmountable here based on the way the code is currently drafted.
Okay, all right, thank you. Councilmember Stokes.
Yeah, I appreciate the conversation. That was one of the reasons I wanted for us to get into this. And it just seems with all the conversation, we're making a decision kind of on the fly that without at the last moment that it's difficult to say whether this is in terms of the streets and where the grocery store would go. It seems to me that we might end up with something that would be very difficult to unfold if it turns out to be not very viable. And it's not one, it's important to know that a grocery store is already allowable. And if the issue is simply where the street goes and how to put that in place, I think that could be done relatively quickly and with assurance with a development agreement. And the same thing with childcare. It's just this, I mean, I think we all want to do something to assure we can get a grocery store in there. We also want this project to go forward, but you know, at some point we just have to come to a point and say, okay, we've made enough concessions. We made this. We think we all have a very, very good project here, and this last piece should not hold it up. And I think we don't want to come back later and have to unwind something that gets all out of whack, which it could if we go forward as proposed. And I appreciate Councilmember Robertson's concerns about this. She has a lot of experience in working with cities with this, and so that's good to hear. So I seconded the motion because I want to have this conversation, but it seems to me that going forward as it without the amendment does not preclude a grocery store going in that area. And the issue of parking and all those other issues have come up and haven't been addressed really. So the best way, both for the developer and for the city and the constituency, is to adopt this as proposed, I mean, without this amendment, and start the development agreement process. And I think that could be done in a rational time period. And I think it's one of these things that at the last minute, it's difficult to make solid decisions based on what people think about this or that. And I'm just concerned we may end up with not having a grocery store and having real problems in that area and having to come back and spend a lot of time trying to undo this, when the best way to go on this particular one is to go with the proposal that staff has put forward, get into a development agreement right away. It's not something that's going to take 5 years. We would have had this project done if we'd done a development agreement earlier. So that's the way I feel about it now. I think this has been a good discussion. I appreciate all the conversation on it, and I did second it, but I will not vote for it.
So Councilmember Robertson, I see your hand is up. Deputy Mayor has an opportunity to withdraw this motion and put in a new motion if he'd like to, unless you have more feedback, Councilmember Robertson. I see Councilmember Zahn has her hand up as well.
I do. I have a couple of questions for Mike. Sorry, I didn't let you know I was going to ask these before. I usually try to do that. What's the block length that we're trying to depart from is 200 and we're trying to make it 350. What's the block length in downtown?
So Nick, as far as the specific dimensional requirements, I'm going to hand that Councilmember Robertson to Nick. He's more familiar with the dimensional requirements here.
Okay.
You want to kind of respond to the council members' questions?
The average block length in downtown and Bellred.
So the block lengths in downtown, the super blocks are typically 600 feet by 600 feet. And then in Bellred, the East Main TOD is actually modeled after Bellred. So it's 1,300 feet is the perimeter block district distance in Bellred.
Okay, and then which is, I'm trying to think, that's a little bit more than 300 if you go 1,300, because 1,200 would be 300 for every side. So it's a little bit more than 300 in Bellred.
That's correct. It would be 325 and it's also 325 in East Main. They are the same.
Okay, well, but this says 200. Oh, this is
The exception area.
Oh, it's the exception area. Okay. And in Factoria, do you know?
Ooh, I do not.
That's fine. So the reason that the grocery store, even though it's allowed under the zoning, isn't really feasible with the smaller block size is because grocery stores are really large. They're one floor. And even if they're underneath at the ground floor of a high-rise building, they tend to be one floor. They tend to have to be big. And when you have a high-rise, there are, what do you call them, pillars that then you have to figure out how to design the grocery store so that you have enough room and you don't have pillars blocking people with their carts and whatnot. So they have to be big enough to fit within the block. And that's why the developer said they can't really, they want to put them at market. Met Market wants to come here, but they can't do it with these block length sizes. They need the bigger block lengths to have a bigger grocery store. Because grocery stores are 70,000 square feet or more. And then you need parking and all that other stuff. So that's why the exception. I think that based on the discussion, Deputy Mayor Newhouse's motion is not going to pass. So I would like to make a substitute motion to make the exception to LUC 2025 Q100E4A to read 114th Avenue Southeast. Block size and length requirements shall not apply to, oh wait, there's a typo here, to the any project, to the project limit, or any project limit, the should be stricken, to any project limit wholly contained within 300 feet from 114th Avenue Southeast or Main Street. And what I'm reading for without the typo is exactly what was in the desk packet sent to council on Friday, which was Deputy Mayor's original motion. I'd like to have a vote on that because it sounds like the grocery store one is not going to pass.
If Deputy Mayor will second it.
Second.
Okay,
Thank
so
you.
that's a replacement amendment and you're withdrawing your first amendment.
Correct.
Deputy Mayor. Okay, council members on.
Okay, so I just want to make sure, since I didn't quite get my first round. So now we're actually talking about the amendment without naming grocery stores. I just want to make sure that I'm correct.
Yes,
that
you are correct.
It's this language, but it's not 350 feet, it's 300 feet. Is that correct? Just want to make sure I'm clear about what it is I'm commenting on.
The motion, the substitute motion I made, Councilmember Rezone, is exactly what was in the desk packet, except without the extra stray the.
Is it on what we see on the screen?
Correct.
Yeah, that's basically it. I was reading from the actual code.
Okay.
So.
Okay, I see. Well, so what I was actually going to comment on is that I would support what was proposed where we are putting this exception for grocery stores and daycare centers, but I am not supporting an completely open change to this because as Mike described, there were a number of factors that staff came up with to look at this proposal. And I thought that what we were talking about with my colleagues was providing this exception to allow grocery stores, which I'm completely supportive of, and I support the mayor's proposal to also then include daycare centers. And I actually thought that Councilmember Barksdale's proposal that we also look at broadening to unmet neighborhood needs actually gives developers more flexibility and not less, since this is an exception that we're providing for them. So I am not supportive of this amendment if it takes out the fact that it is there in support of the daycare centers or grocery stores or some other neighborhood unmet need. Thank you.
The amendment as proposed does not specify what would provide it, what would allow these exceptions. It is open. So you're correct in your assessment, Councilmember Zahn. Okay, I see Councilmember Lee has his hand up, so we'll go back around here. Councilmember Lee.
I would like to see the proposed amendment. What is it?
On the screen in front of you.
On the screen, I'm looking at.
Deputy Mayor Amendment.
Perimeter block lanes exception amendment.
Yeah.
Luca Ordinance 2,000 feet from 114 Avenue Southeast. Amendment is 350 feet from 114th and Main Street. Is that what it is?
That is correct.
Okay, so it's this original amendment Deputy Mayor proposed.
Yes.
Correct.
And this is what he's still supporting.
Correct.
All right.
Correct.
And which is proposed by Councilmember Robertson. Right?
So, yes.
So after all this, I'm really completely.
We are currently voting on, we are currently discussing what is on the screen in front of you.
Yes.
I have a.
As I said, when I first started, I don't know how many minutes ago, I support this.
Yes,
for
I
all
know.
the reasons we stipulated, we talk about. Since it's all the information has been put out there, I want to make a final statement that we don't really know what we're talking about. So as a result, there are a lot of unintended consequences. I have no idea what that might be, and we're listening to very different sides. The staff, I respect the staff. I know where they're coming from, and I respect the developers. They are the one that's going to put money where their mouth is. They are taking the risk, and they are telling us very clearly that they need this amendment. And I believe they're not bluffing us. And we have been working with them for quite a while. And everything we're talking about, starting from the Ccat program, we have to develop trust.
Councilmember Lee.
Trust.
Councilmember Lee. I'm going to ask you.
I'm just saying. That's what
I'm going to ask you to be very concise with your comments right now.
Very concise.
Because we are in the middle of a discussion.
We have to trust and know what they know, and then I support it. That's it.
Okay. So I have a question, Mike. You've heard some of the council concerns about specifying a specific use for unlocking this exception. Do you see language that would make sense? Councilmember Robertson seemed to think that was, I don't want to quote her, but not good code to put that language in there. Is there a way to incorporate this desire to have an exception for a particular use, or does that not make sense?
Well, we haven't had a chance to really think the language through on how we would integrate the specific exceptions, but you again would need to modify the language again to say that this expansion into the purple area of the exception would only apply to buildings that contained daycare or a grocery store, if that was the council's preference.
But does that make sense to do that to a developer when they don't really know who their tenant is before they're building?
Of course, the developer is looking for as much flexibility or freedom to, redevelop the property without constraint. So it's on balance, as I mentioned in my initial comments, it's on balance between, that shift in giving additional development rights or flexibility to the developer versus the council or the city maintaining some control through the code and how the development configures within this area. So again, the blue area allows development to not include blocks. This would expand that area into the purple area where blocks would not be required for any development based on the way it is currently proposed. So again, you can amend. I don't have a specific answer to the question of how you would amend the language, but we could work on something.
I'm just wondering if we did that and voted that in, if a developer were to have a larger space created and then couldn't get a daycare or a grocery store, would they then be stuck with this space that they couldn't lease to anything but a grocery store or childcare? And I would hate to do that to somebody.
Right. No, typically the initial development for something like that, it's a fairly customized development project or space. So they generally would have a tenant before they would proceed with something like that because of the specific tenant needs and configuration for their programs. So generally, no, again, a grocery store is a fairly specific use. It's difficult, again, to determine exactly where the grocery store would be located here and what the constraints are that are preventing it from being included in a development proposal.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, we have a choice tonight. We can vote this amendment that is in front of us, yes or no. We can put this off till next week. And that would include all the rest of the ordinances because they all are reliant on passing of this. Well, this is an amendment. No, so that's not true. But we could, we could put everything off till next week and give you an opportunity to explore these kind of restrictions on the exceptions.
So certainly, Mayor, we could certainly do that. I think it's also worth noting that based on previous council direction to make sure we didn't have large retail like box stores, regional retail destinations, the maximum square footage allowed for retail in East Main is 25,000 square feet. That's a fairly modest grocery store size. To go beyond that would require a departure from the code that would need a development agreement to get approval if it was a specific development proposal. So I think that's also worth noting that that is a relevant provision within the code that would apply to a grocery store configuration as well.
Okay. So I'm just going to say I am ready to vote on this proposed amendment tonight myself. And I will not support the amendment as written. Councilmember Stokes. I don't hear you, Councilmember Stokes. There you go.
No, I appreciate what Mike has just said, and I'm not sure anybody really understands what this will mean. Would there be no streets, no blocks on this? What impact would this have? Is that piece actually big enough for a grocery store? Is this just grocery store is just a kind of something out there to help get to deal with not wanting to have streets in the project? And I think that the developers trying to get the best of what they want to do, and they're going to do a great project. I think the staff is doing what it does very well, and I don't see this as the developers know everything, so just give them whatever they want to do, or say, staff knows everything, give them what they want to do. I think both sides or both groups in this are very intelligent and working towards getting a project together And I just don't want to play this game of, well, let's just let the developers do what they want to do because they're there to do it and make money. I believe we have a project that will be very, very good, and we're getting kind of bogged down with how can we help make it do that in a very uncomfortable process right now. So I would vote against any moving forward on this. Let's come back next week. Let's have some more intelligent conversations. The deputy mayor's proposal, I think, was good in the way it was set out. It really stimulated some discussion, which we hadn't had about this. And I think we're all want this to be a great project. We would like to have a grocery store, like to have childcare, and any decision we make tonight might just be one of those we wake up in the next morning and say, why did we do that? So I would prefer to put this off another week. We've been talking about this for 5, 6, 7 years. Another week's not going to hurt. And
okay. I appreciate that. And I'd like to get everybody's, you heard my input and you've heard Councilmember Stokes. So the question is, do you want to vote on this proposed amendment tonight, or do you want to push it off till next week to have staff kind of examine? Councilmember Robertson, and then I'm going to go Councilmember Zahn.
Okay, I think I lost my train of thought in looking at this. I'm ready to vote tonight. I thought that there was an exception in here though, that for grocery stores being more than 25,000 square feet. There's a annotation I don't really understand, A8 on page 29. Can someone clarify whether that applies to grocery stores or not?
Nick or Trisna, I don't have the code in front of me right now. Can you answer the council member's question?
Yes, so Councilmember Robertson, the footnote with the 25,000 square foot limitation would apply to wholesale retail and many other retail uses within Eastman, to limit those types of uses like grocery stores to neighborhood serving type scaled stores.
So does that mean 25,000 square feet? Because a neighborhood grocery store is more like 50.
It would mean 25,000 square feet. And in formulating that recommendation for 25,000 square feet, we did look at a few examples of city Targets, city Walmarts. We looked at the example over on 1/16 of the grocery store over there to determine, what is that neighborhood scaled or neighborhood serving kind of grocery store size to formulate that 25,000 square foot.
Yeah, I thought it didn't apply to food and food stores. So that's where I'm getting confused. So, but I'd like to finish this tonight. We have a heavy agenda next week. And the amendment was in the packet. So I'm in favor of voting tonight. It just makes sense to me to allow, if we want to see this kind of use, we need to allow the flexibility for the property owner. And I think that while I absolutely support the DA, getting a quick DA on something like this is not really reasonable, because if the developers come with the DA, it's going to be for height. That's going to require more SEPA, and it will be other things folded into it. You're talking, it's just kicking the can down the road on this issue. And to me, it makes a lot of sense to do it. So I would like to vote on this amendment tonight so we can get to the next amendment, so we can get to the underlying ordinances.
Okay, thank you. Deputy Mayor, and then council members on.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate. Thank you, Councilmember Robertson. Yeah, I feel like we are kind of kicking the can down the road if we force them into a DA. I mean, again, and I think Councilmember Lee mentioned this as well, giving them the flexibility to create that grocery store, or for that matter, I did like Councilmember Barksdale's suggestion of an unmet need in the community or in the neighborhood. I think language like that could suffice as well, but it appears clear to me that this kind of straightforward language is the best that we should be using going forward. Listen to my colleagues as well as staff, that putting too much of a constraint around this exactly how it's going to be used creates some difficulties in the code, it sounds like. So I'm ready to move forward with this as well. I'll be voting yes, because I think we owe it to the developers to have a little bit of flexibility here. And this is not letting developers do whatever developers want to do. That's not what this is at all. This is a very simple amendment, just giving a little bit of flexibility for their project. That is it. So just want to make that clear as well. So again, happy to move forward with this and we'll be voting for it. Thank you.
Councilmember Zahn?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Well, I would say that I appreciate the robust conversation with my colleagues. And, you know, I was supportive of what the deputy mayor originally brought up, which was this amendment specifically, though, related to grocery stores. And I was supportive of the mayor, including daycare centers. I was supporting Councilmember Barksdale talking about unmet neighborhood needs related to our comp plan. Those to me gives the flexibility. It directly addresses the metropolitan market request, but doesn't make it an unlimited piece, because ultimately this is about what is both good for the developer and for the city and the community as well. So I am ready to vote tonight, but I will say that I am not going to support this current amendment that does not have the focus on those three areas that I mentioned. So if there is an opportunity for another amendment that includes those three elements, I would be willing to support that and ready and happy to support that, but not this one that is completely unlimited. Thank you.
So I think the choice is this one tonight, or if you wanted to consider the amendment that you're describing, that would be something that staff could study and bring back next week.
So, Mayor, are we saying that from Mike's standpoint, we couldn't vote on an amendment that included those three provisions in it?
I don't think
Mike?
Staff is ready to put an amendment forward that would make sense with those three provisions, and want some time to figure out how best to do that if that was our interest.
Okay. Yeah, I wasn't sure if that's what Mike was saying, because it sounded like he was talking about only apply to buildings that contains a grocery store, daycare center, or anyway, okay.
So would you prefer to wait till next week to see an amendment that has considered what you described, or would you prefer to vote on the amendment before us tonight?
Well, I would say that I am not going to support this amendment as written that has no limitations. I had still hoped that Mike could provide language so that we could still vote tonight, but it sounds like that may not be possible. I see Brad's hand up. Maybe he has some thoughts.
Go ahead, Mr. Miyake.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mayor and Council. I guess the question I have is, Mike, you've been hearing the conversation, and would you be able, you've heard the interest of the council members with respect to grocery stores and daycares. Would a week be enough time for you to come back with something?
It's a little bit of a squeeze given all the other things that are on everybody's plate. We would need time though to make sure that we vetted any language, because we want to make sure we don't have any unintended consequences for whatever we might do as far as the amendments are concerned, and that they are appropriately targeting what the council members are looking for as well. So it may take more than a week. We could attempt to do it in a week if that's what the council directs, but it's a bit of a squeeze to get it done in just a few days here.
Thank you, Mike.
So those are the options before us tonight, is to vote for what's in front of us, or to—
Madam Mayor,
you'll get your chance, or to
right.
take the opportunity to have staff work on what you're describing, council members, on, and bring it back to us hopefully in a week. Councilmember Barksdale.
All right, thank you, Mayor. So I'm in a similar boat in terms of not having just an open amendment, but would like to see an amendment come back that has some qualifications on it, and I would support that.
Okay, and Councilmember Zahn, I never really got your final opinion.
Yeah, so I would rather have the staff come back with some language that gives a little more shape to this.
And I see Councilmember Stokes nodding his head as well. So Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I would be fine with that. If staff can do that by next week, I'd be fine bringing that back if we can work that into our agenda.
Okay. Councilmember Lee, I'll give you 1 minute.
You gave everybody lots of time to talk about what you want to talk about. Then you don't give me 1 minute. Come on.
I'm going to give everybody 1 minute if they raise their hand.
I'm not talk about whether I was going to vote, how I'm going to vote, and whatever I need to say. So I need to do that regardless. You know, that's just absolutely biased, absolutely impossible. You know, it's obvious to everybody.
Councilmember Lee, are you done?
No, I'm not done. No, I'm
Okay.
not done.
Go
I'm going to
ahead,
be
then.
concise and precise to the point of the question you asked. I would like to make the decision vote on today because the reason, one, you can already see when somebody raised the question, somebody talk about something, just kept on talking about unintended consequences. We don't know what's going to happen. So they just come around and around. Okay. So if we delay this, if we're going to talk about DA, if we're going to spend so much more time to talk about the DA and other things, everything's going to come out. We're going to keep talking. It's not going to be end. We already spent so months and years to talk about this. So I would really like to see this move. Okay, and I feel that it is a question. I agree with Councilmember Robertson. I like to vote today.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments or questions? I'm seeing 4 votes for delaying till next week to take a vote on this. And I see Councilmember Barksdale has his hand up. And I will give you 1 minute too.
I won't even take that long. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay.
Yeah, no change in my vote. I just want to say I would love to do a retrospective on East Main before we go into Overton, maybe at our retreat or before the retreat.
Okay. Any other 1 minute comments from anybody? Okay, so I'm seeing a majority of people who would like to revisit this next week. And our rest of our business was really dependent upon this ordinance, and we can't approve.
What's the majority? Can you tell me who wanted to vote tonight?
Councilmember Stokes, Councilmember Zahn, Councilmember Barksdale, myself, and Deputy Mayor.
Mayor Robinson, can I?
Yes,
very quickly. I apologize. I would suggest there are a couple of different options. You can look at withdrawing the amendment and the main motion, or you can actually someone can make a motion to postpone this to a time certain, which would be, it sounds like next week, but I'm a little uncomfortable just leaving the motions laying on the table at this point.
I hadn't gotten there yet. But
okay,
yeah,
thank you.
You are correct. So I'm just clarifying that that's what the majority of the council wants to do, is to delay this, and that we're not going to be able to do the rest of the meeting because they rely on the ordinance, passing of ordinance 6627, and this is an amendment to that ordinance. So can we withdraw the amendment, and can we withdraw the motion for the amendment and then withdraw the motion for the ordinance 6627?
Withdrawn.
Well, it was my motion.
I was talking about the main motion.
And Councilmember Robertson?
I have a question before I agree to, I'll make a motion to postpone, but I'd like to take up the next amendment because I think it's much more straightforward. And
we'll talk about that, whether we can do that, because it's my understanding that we cannot, but I'm going to be open to hearing from Charmaine whether that's possible. Okay.
So what I'd like, okay.
So
what I'm
both-
willing to do is make a motion to, at this point, postpone the amendment motion that's on the table right now to next week. Then we'll, if we can take up the next amendment, we can do that amendment. If it passes or council's ready to vote and it passes, then what we would do is we would postpone the main motion after that fact. And I'm happy to do all the parliamentary stuff on that. I just want to know what the options are. Thank you.
Okay, so we've withdrawn the amendment. We still have ordinance 6627 on the table, do we not?
Yes,
The amendment has not been withdrawn. I said I would be willing to promote a motion to postpone it, but I wanted to hear from the clerk if we could postpone that and then take up the next amendment.
Yes, you can postpone the amendment. The main motion is still on the table. You can make another amendment, a separate amendment, and the council could proceed with that tonight if the council choose to do so.
Okay, so when I said we withdrew the amendment, I'm sorry, I should have said we postpone it till next week.
We have to have a motion to do that, though.
Yes,
I know that. I'm just
Okay.
trying to clarify what we're talking
Okay.
about here. Thank you.
I have a
So-
question. I have a
Oh,
question
no.
before I decide what to do. I have no idea what is going on. Okay, so my question is, the two questions. One is we're withdrawing the amendment by deputy mayor. Okay, that's one on the table. Second, what about the amendment? Councilmember Robertson is
Okay.
maybe will be
Let me
proposing.
explain. I'm gonna ask everybody to have patience with me here while I try to explain the big picture. So we have a motion in front of us to approve an ordinance, 6627. And Deputy Mayor made a motion to bring forward an amendment. And we are not going to do the amendment tonight. We're going to withdraw that and we're going to propose that that amendment be taken up next week. There is another amendment coming forward to us that Councilmember Robertson will be proposing that is under ordinance 6627. So we're going to leave that open. And we're going to, as soon as we make a motion to move discussion of Deputy Mayor's amendment to next week, and we vote on that, then we will ask Councilmember Robertson to propose her amendment. Okay? So Deputy Mayor, or I guess I don't know if you know how to do this. I'm getting confused as to whether we withdraw this and re-propose it for next week, or if we take what you said and we move it to next week. And clerk, I don't know, do you have guidance on that?
Yes, thank you. Technically, it's Councilmember Robertson's amendment at this point, so
sorry.
she
It
can,
is,
that's okay. She can choose to withdraw, make a motion to withdraw, and it can be taken up in some form or fashion next week. Or the council can choose to postpone the motion, as Councilmember Robertson stated, till next week.
Councilmember Robertson, what would you prefer?
I would like to move to postpone action and discussion or action on the motion to amend whatever ordinance this is, ordinance 6627, to a date certain, which is next Monday, 12/13/21.
Can I have a question on that? Can I have a question on that?
Oh,
You're
yes.
proposing both amendments, yours
Just the
and,
first amendment is going to be postponed.
yeah, Deputy Mayor's amendment,
Correct.
not
Correct.
yours.
It's
Well, it
actually
became mine because I did a substitute.
No,
Councilmember Robertson
I mean,
advised.
there's another amendment that's waiting. You did, but it makes a difference to me, okay?
We'll bring the next
Because
motion, the next amendment
yeah,
up
that's
next.
why I want to be
month.
clear, because whatever you do.
Councilmember Lee,
I understand. Wait a
need
minute,
you
wait
to
a minute,
just
wait a minute. There's
stop
another option
talking
is
so I can finish this.
I can also make a motion.
No.
I can make a
Okay,
motion.
I'm going to
I
call
can
for
make
the
a
vote.
motion.
All those
Deputy
in
Mayor
favor of
made the
council
amendment.
members' motion to move the discussion to next week on
Understand.
her amendment?
You can
say aye.
vote on it. You can vote. on it.
Aye.
Aye.
That's 3 ayes,
Aye.
4 ayes, 5 from Jeremy.
Okay, so I just want to make sure we're voting on postponing, right?
Yeah,
It-
to
there was-
next
I
week.
couldn't hear very well. Okay,
I'm
yes, aye.
sorry. Okay, Councilmember Lee, yes or no?
No.
Okay. So it passes 6-1 to bring this back next week. Okay, thank you for your patience with me. This is a little complex, but we'll get through it. So we still have the motion on the table for Ordinance 6627. And we have another amendment to that. And Councilmember Robertson is going to propose that. So go ahead, Councilmember Robertson.
Thanks. I'm just going to make the motion and then I'll walk with staff and I'll walk you through it. So I sent out, just to orient everyone, I sent out, or staff sent out on my behalf, the amendment Friday. We heard from Eastside Housing Roundtable over the weekend, and I worked with staff today to tweak what I had sent out on Friday to take into account their input. So the motion I'm going to put on the table is the one that was emailed out to everyone today. And that is, I move to amend ordinance number 6627, section 3, note 2 in 2025 Q060A to allow for 50% of the non-residential development capacity to be permitted and constructed, and requiring a 1/3 of the minimum amount of residential development to receive approval of the first inspection for work under the building permit before additional non-residential development may be permitted and constructed, and allowing the increment of non-residential development to be increased by 15% for every third of required residential use that receives approval of the first inspection for work under the building permit.
Second.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
So the way the code was written before, it allowed 60% not of commercial development, only up to 60% to be built before the developer had to build all of the 35% housing and before they could get the rest of their commercial development. So we had requests from stakeholders asking to phase it so that they could build it as market demands in pieces, and they wanted to do that as a matter of right. So what got sent out Friday is I worked with staff, and they explained to me that what the developer had asked for would leave the last third of the housing as the final piece to be delivered, in which case we might never get that. Now, I think we would. I think the market would make it so, but I know how important housing is to this council at this site. And so we moved it around. Mike, can you pull up the phasing, that really great, that showed the blocks? Our staff are so brilliant. They just come up with stuff. So this is what is this what it was before? So
Yeah,
you could
this
do the
is the
first
original.
block, and then you had to do the second block before you could do the third block. So what I moved it to, can you show them what is being proposed then? Now, what I moved it to was I took the 60% down to 50% so we get housing a little sooner. That means, they can only build 50% of the non-residential before they have to start delivering on the housing. So, and you can see the order that they would deliver them, the gray being non-residential, the green being residential, with the very last piece being the commercial, so that all of the residential is built before they're allowed to fully max on the commercial. So this allows phasing. Now, the comment we had from the Eastside Housing Roundtable said, wait a second, what if they want to build at the same time? They're building office here and residential here. Can they build simultaneously? So I talked with staff today, and the concern was, well, what do you mean simultaneously? They can pull a permit for both, but then they may not, they could just stick the residential permit in a drawer and build the commercial. So that's where our brilliant staff came up with this idea of making sure that it's actually underway where you have an inspection. So by doing it, amending it this way, one, we get the housing a little bit faster than under the default code that is in our packet. Two, that allows the developer to phase it, where they continue to build the residential in phases in order to unlock the commercial in phases. And three, by putting in the additional language, they can build them simultaneously. We just have to make sure that they're really, this is not, if the developer's watching, we trust you. This is not at all about trust. It's just about making sure the land use code is right, so that it's done, so that the people of this city will get what the council is establishing as the standards for this zone, which is the residential requirement, and making sure that that's built sooner, because I know that's important to this council. So that is the essence of my amendment. I think it makes a lot of sense. It gives the developer more flexibility and will also deliver housing for this area a little bit sooner than it otherwise would. And I'm happy to answer questions or you can ask questions of staff. This really was very much in partnership with staff helping me draft this and really think it through. And I appreciated the help from them. So thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Robertson. I see Councilmember Stokes' hand up, and I see Councilmember Lee. Go ahead, Councilmember Stokes. Son.
Yeah, I seconded that because I appreciate this. I think it's really an advancement. It will help us get affordable housing and housing quicker. It doesn't upset the apple cart in terms of the whole overall development. And actually, when you look at it, it's makes it even smoother in a sense and more sense to it. So I think this is an improvement. And I'm heartily in favor of it because I really want them to get moving both on residential and non-residential, and particularly residential that includes affordable housing. So I'm ready to vote on it.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Lee.
Thank you. Yeah, I really appreciate what Councilmember Robertson has done. I mean, he's a gem. She's a gem in land use decisions. My question to her is, we know that the developers concerned that when they are required to build residential, affordable residential, they need to have the economic support from non-residential development as well, because it's uncertain how well the residential property is being marketed and accepted. And so with your modification here, and I really think it's great that you have worked with the staff to come up with this idea, how would that impact the developers' concern? Would that, would that make it something possible for them not to be too tied to the residential development in terms of the economic, support for developing the whole development per se?
Mayor, can I answer?
Yes.
That was a question to me. So Councilmember Lee, the market for office is so strong right now that if we had this zoned for what anything goes, it would probably develop 100% office, maybe a little retail. But the council's made it really a high priority that we see housing here. So the way to do it, to make sure that we get housing sooner rather than later, is to have there be tiered unlocking of the commercial. They can build 1.1 million square feet of commercial out of the blocks. And hopefully once that's, I'd hope they would do residential at the same time, but that will start generating revenue. But then if they want to unlock more, they have to do some of the residential. And so it's a push-pull. But I think that this is fair because the council wants to see this residential here. If we actually mean it, then it needs to be phased. That doesn't mean that they can't change it. They could just build the first tier, the 1.1 million square feet, and stop. They could. And that's any land use code. You never know what people are going to for sure build and when. But I think that there's enough of the commercial still on the table that it's going to very much incentivize the development of residential. And if this ultimately does not work, the developer can seek a different phasing plan in the DA, but this gives them a phasing plan as a right that hopefully will encourage the residential sooner and make sure that it happens somewhat simultaneously with the second half of the commercial.
Thank you. It's very reasonable. Appreciate it.
Okay, Councilmember Zahn.
Yes, thank you. So I appreciate the language that's written in about making sure that, we do have our first inspection, so it's tied to that. I think what I'm really trying to understand is this visual of the 1, 2, 3, 4 makes sense to me. Where I'm struggling though is the table that's actually going to be in the code. I can't get the math to look the same as the graph. So help me understand, maybe from staff standpoint or Councilmember Robertson, the table says the portion of the total residential that must be constructed prior to non-res, 0 divided by 3, that's 0. So this to me looks like you can have up to 50%. If you could go to the table instead of the graph, please. The way I look at the table is it's saying that you can have 50% non-residential before you, and at 50% residential, you have built, or non-res, you've built 0% residential. And when you get to 65% non-residential, a third of 35% is just the 11.7%. So can you help me? Because I feel like I'm missing something in how I translate from the table to the actual visual graph that shows the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
So Councilmember Zahn, you're understanding it perfectly. As the code is written today, they could build 60% before they have to deliver any residential. So now it's 50%, and then each phase would be unlocked. So at the 50% level, if they want to get the additional 15% of commercial, which is the 65%, then they have to build a third of the residential to unlock that. Then once they're at 65% commercial, if they want to get to 80% of the maximum commercial, they have to build the next third of the housing. Then to get the last 20% max on the commercial, they have to build the final third of the housing. Does that make sense? So it's just a textual way of saying the same thing with the bar graph, but the bar graph makes it more understandable to me too.
Okay, so what I'm struggling with is the current draft that we have been seeing this whole time says that when you've gotten to 60% non-residential, you have to build 35% residential. Right now, if I look at the way that this table is drafted, when you get to 50% non-residential, you're not obligated to have built any residential at that point. And when we get to the 65%, which is higher than our original 60%, you're only obligated to provide me 11.7% of residential instead of the 35%. So this actually is more of a slow walk for our residential than what was originally being proposed. And I'm just having troubles with the table and how the math works versus what the animation is showing. So I'm wondering if staff could help me with this.
Nick and Trizzy will walk through the kind of translation of the bar graph to the table.
Sure, I can walk through this, Councilmember Zahn and Councilmember Robertson, if that's okay. So with the draft ordinance, what we're looking at here is 65% as the maximum non-residential development capacity for the TOD, because council did require a 35% minimum housing. And so you would have to reserve, 35% of the development capacity for residential development, and then you would have 65% for non-residential. And so the draft code asks for, or allows for 60% of the non-residential development capacity. So this box is kind of over halfway full. It allows for that to occur before you trip the residential requirement. And so to unlock the middle box, which is the remaining resident or non-residential development, you would have to build the full amount. The developer would have to provide the full 35% housing requirement in order to access that remaining box of non-residential development, which is the
okay, because it's 60% of the 65%.
Yes, correct.
So that's how you're getting the 39%. Okay, so for a comparison, then what we're saying is what was in our original packet is the 39% non-res, then the 35% residential, and then the remaining. Okay, so that's the comparison we're trying to make. It was confusing because we only had one table for the amendment and not the one that was for the code that was being proposed. So, okay. And that's how we're getting to essentially parity And it becomes then more of the phasing of the 2 and 3 into 2 through 7 instead of the 1, 2, 3. So essentially, they end up being mostly to parity. Okay. Thank you for that. That was not really very clear because there was only one table provided with the visuals. Okay, thank you.
Deputy Mayor?
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I just wanted to say fully in support of this, encourage the residential as we've just walked through even more now. So I think it's very clear that this phasing requirement will encourage that residential development, and I'll be supporting it. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm ready to take a vote. Are we ready to take a vote? Deputy Mayor, your hand's still up, or did you have anything else? Okay. All those in favor of passing this amendment as proposed by Councilmember Robertson, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. So good, we got that done. So we cannot pass the ordinance 6627. We've got one amendment passed, and we are going to come back next week and discuss the other amendment. And we cannot work on the other ordinances without having first passed the 6627. And I'm going to ask for clarification on that from Charmaine. Am I correct about that? Oh, your hand's up. Okay, go ahead.
Yes, you are correct. Those are subsequent actions. So just to be clear, since we do have 6627 on the table, I would ask that someone would make a motion to postpone the main motion to December 13th, as well as the subsequent ordinances for consideration on the 13th.
I make that motion.
Second.
All those in favor of moving that discussion and vote to next council meeting, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? I see. Did everybody vote? I didn't catch everybody's vote. Can you raise your hand if you vote aye for this? Okay, thank you. Mr. Miyake, you have your hand up.
Yeah, yes, Mayor. Can I, Mike, can you just, for purposes of, expectations management, tell us what you'll be bringing back as soon as maybe perhaps next week, if you're able to.
That will be our challenge, but we'll see what we can accomplish. We have the Planning Commission and EBCC this week too, so we're a little bit pinched. But that being said, what the amendment that you want us to craft here would be to expand the area in which the blocks are exempted, that purple area, when it would include grocery store, daycare. And I wasn't clear whether the unmet community need would be a provision that you would include in this amendment, which is a fairly broad, that's a challenging one. But if that's what the council is looking for, we'll work on including those three elements in some language for a code amendment to the draft that's in the current council packet. And then we would bring back all of the ordinances that are in the packet this evening for your reconsideration next week.
I heard a desire to examine whether we can put language that is consistent with the comp plan and with the Eastman visioning process that would that you could incorporate into that. Is that correct, Councilmember Barksdale?
That's correct. I'm interested in whether the unmet needs would provide, if there's a firm way to speak to unmet needs, that would be ideal. But yes, the underlying intention is to bring in the comp plan and visioning.
To define what unmet needs would be, right?
Yes.
Right.
Okay. So I don't know, we don't know if that's possible, Mike, but that's what we're asking you to consider.
We will see what we can come up with.
We don't want you to bring back something that doesn't make sense.
Right.
We we
right.
try to avoid that at all costs, right?
Okay, thank you.
Since we will
Well,
be the ones administering it.
And Mayor, just to be clear, we'll do our best, but given I'm looking at the staff here, like there's quite a bit of work to do this week, so we'll do our best.
okay, that's all we ask. And I think we're all aware that we may have to postpone this a little to, I'm hoping we don't have another December meeting after the 13th, but have to take this up in the early new year. So we'll all do our best on that. Okay, well, with that, this unless there's any other comments, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much for your participation and consideration of all the issues, and I look forward to seeing you again next week. Good night.